And we're live. Welcome back to This is Dunder Moose. Thank you guys for joining in. Oh man, was it a spicy one on Twitter today?
It was
So
insane.
I don't think I have the man who started it, but I feel like you were one of the core inside the maelstrom. So I've got Griff Morgan here. Let me pull up some banners for you guys. This is the website, Fellowship of the Thing. My buddy Stormforge, who's been on the show a couple times now, says Griff is one of the top 5 DMs he's ever played with. He's the filmmaker behind Secrets of
Wow.
Blackmoor. He brought us the Lost Dungeons of Tannisborg, which I have right here. He
Look at
brought
that.
us, yeah. He was very kind to send me a proof copy of Blackmoor Foundations, and I was just telling him I appreciate the form factor matches. They're going to look good on the shelf next to each other. So we're going to be talking about that.
Yeah, I'm here to push my product, so go to the website and look at that.
Heck yeah. Well, and you kind of
spend
kicked off
all your lunch money there.
You kind of kicked off this whole thing, at least for a lot of us in the Bro SR, with the
It's an ongoing. Yeah.
That movie is it is if you want to use that hashtag, that movie is like mandatory part of your education. You need to watch that. And you run Arnecon. You've had one already. We got Arnecon 2 coming in October, the weekend of October 4th. So enough introduction. I think everybody watching this probably already knows who you are. Welcome back on the show. I think it was 11 months. It was almost a full year.
Yeah.
Since I had you on last time.
Yep.
And we're here to talk about who gets to use the term Braunstein and what does it mean. But before we get into the drama, I wanted to start off with, let's establish your bona fides, right? Like, Dave Wesely.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine.
If you would kind of tell us what it was like meeting him and what kind of a guy is he?
Well, I was crapping my pants when I first met him. Because it was one of the first interviews we did on the documentary, and I'm not really a documentary filmmaker, and
yes,
so
you are now.
I am now, yeah. But everybody was telling me, this is the guy that really invented role-playing games.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh crap, And he's a really friendly, nice guy, but I was just like, it was, one of my first interviews. I was really nervous. I cut him off too often when he was talking in the interview, and it's pretty sloppy work.
Sounds like my first interview with you.
Yeah, it's like you're jumping in too much. You just got to relax and let it go.
Chill and let it go.
Yeah, like with your first interview, you have 50 questions, and then afterwards, you're like, just bring a piece of paper with 5 questions, and then just drill down in each of those questions. What are the real questions you want to ask? And so I kind of, I think the Brosers are doing David Wesely a disservice by appropriating his name for something that isn't Brownstein. It's like, like I was saying earlier, it's like somebody taking their elf game and telling everybody that it's a Brownstein, or taking their game of Risk and saying, like, today we're going to call our Risk game Brownstein. Not because it is a Brownstein, but just because we want to call it that. And that's just kind of, and that's a name that David Wesely used for a game that is fundamental to the entire hobby. And so, it's just more Broser crap. I'm used to it, but it's something that hits close to me because I'm friends with David Wesely. I've spent a lot of time with him talking about Brownstein during the movie making, which was years of that. Then after the movie was made, I wanted to do a game version that people could buy and play the game. And so for a long time, we were talking about doing that, and we weren't really sure how to approach it. And I finally said, well, what if I just write the rules? You provide me the resources, and then I just interview you for this and get your interpretation of what the rules should be, and I'll just write it down for you. So I'm kind of doing all the writing, and he's just, I spent thus far, I probably spent about, 6 to 7 hours interviewing him about really specific, minute details about what happens during a Brownstein game.
So there's a parallelism there for me. Because it seems like, well, I have a follow-up question, but it seems like kind of similar to Arneson and Gygax, where Arneson was the creator, had, at least from what I'm new at this, I'm trying to catch up, I'm trying to learn. Seems to me from what I've seen, and especially from what I've read in Blackmoor Foundations, I get the image that Arneson really had the groundbreaking ideas, and Gary had the ordered mind, the game designer mentality to get it recorded. Is that's kind of what's happening with you?
Well, Gary also was really important within the sort of the little cottage industry that was gaming back then.
Yeah.
You know, before D&D, it's just like something you might run into an Avalon Hill game in a department store. I saw them in department stores as a kid, you know. And often they weren't even war games. They were like these other games that they produced that were just kind of family board game things. And so Gary was really significant because he was already working with Guide-On games and producing stuff through Guide-On games. So to people that were reading the fanzines and really in deep into that sort of underground clique of wargamers nationwide, Gary Gygax was a super significant person even before he did, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, from what I gather, because you can find him in all these fanzines, and he's writing rules.
Clearly, Wesely, he doesn't need a gatekeeper like that in you because he can gather his own audience if he wanted to, right?
Yeah.
But as far as somebody, like, it seems like why hasn't he done this before? Why hasn't he written these rules down? It seems like it's a game that he just understands, you know, at a conscious level.
Well, he had he did when Dave Arneson left TSR, like in '76 or so.
Yeah.
Dan Nicholson put together a small company. I think it was at that time that Dan Nicholson put the game company together. It was a little company called 4D Interactive. I have a mug somewhere. I should have gotten it for the show.
Cool.
For my coffee. I have a 4D Interactive mug. And the 4Ds were the four Daves, which was Dave Arneson, David Wesely, David McGarry, and Dan Nicholson. Or the four Ds, not the Daves. And then they also would joke that Ross Maker was a D with an extra leg, that if it fell off, it would just turn into a D. And so Ross was in there. And so what they were doing was they were contracting the company out as programmers to ColecoVision.
Oh, yeah, I remember ColecoVision.
Yeah, and so they were porting games like Zaxxon, all the big stand-up games. They were the ones who did the grunt work of converting those games into like these tiny little things you could hold in your hand. And it's interesting because, you know, the industry is tiny. Like, people talk about Janelle Jacquays. Janelle was working as an employee for ColecoVision. She was the manager that was in charge of interfacing with the 4D Interactive crew. And when I started in
video games,
she started in gaming fanzines with the Dungeoneer fanzine. Okay. And I think she was like out with the Texas crew or the Arizona crew. I interviewed her on the phone once, and I never got a chance to video interview her, which is really sad because she was kind of top of my list of like really important creators from the early days, and it was really sad when she passed away. But she said that their group was like the best group of contractors to work with because they just did the stuff and did it well. We have interviews with them where they talk about their 4D days, and they talk about Dan Nicholson and how like Dan isn't famous within the D&D history, but he's famous within the Blackmore history for them because he was such a significant person. You find Dan appearing in the history in places. He was the first person to bring a computer to Gen Con back in the 70s. And he brought, I think he was associated with like IBM or not IBM. It was the same people that were associated with Plato people. Anyway, he was working for this company, and he got them to loan him a mini computer, which is something you bring in on a pallet with like a pallet jack, and it's something that these days would probably be like, you know, less powerful than something like this that you keep in your pocket, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a big deal. He brought that into Gen Con, and people were like, "Oh my God, games on computers, that's insane," right? So they did that, and then Arneson did the lawsuit against Gary Gygax, which really came out of the fact that they weren't paying any royalties to Arneson that were respectful of his ownership of the name and the properties that were being developed. And I've seen all the like what the lawyers used and presented as court evidence, a lot of it. And a great deal of it is just like a Xeroxed sheet of what's in the monster manual and what's in Monsters and Treasure. And it's like, and a little pen mark. And it's like, number appearing, hit points, armor class,
Yeah.
movement rate, treasure type. It's like, yes, it has all this other stuff that wasn't in the original game, but it has all this stuff that was in the original game. And it's using part of the original game's name. So consequently, what you're doing is essentially plagiarizing Dave Arneson's work by not giving him any credit or giving him any royalties off these books, right?
Do you have anything to do with the podcast When We Were Wizards? I have the link in the bottom of the screen right now. It's Paul Stormberg.
Yeah, well, I know Paul, and Paul
He's going to be at Arnecon too, right?
Yeah, I'm good friends with Paul too. He's another really nice person. I really like him. Paul is probably more tightly tied in with all of the old gamers from TSR and things like that than I am.
Okay.
I'm more in like the Twin Cities. He's more a Lake Geneva guy in a way.
So I was listening to their podcast and Wesley's in it. And like one of the things that happened that kind of gave me an idea of who Wesely seems to be. He's talking about that lawsuit. And so the thing I'm talking about happens after Arneson was out, but he still got to come to the meetings because he was still a shareholder.
Wesley was, yeah.
And so,
and I think Arneson was too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Arneson told Wesely, when I come to these things, Tim Kask sits behind me to kind of threaten. And
Tim, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not trying
to say anything bad. I'm just repeating what I heard on the podcast, that Wesely purposefully waited until Arneson sat down and Tim sat down, and then he sat down behind him.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that kind of sums up like the kind of friend that's loyal, that has your back, that's going to watch out for you. Is that
Tim Kask did really mean things to Dave Arneson? I mean,
I wasn't trying to talk about Tim so much as what you.
Well, I think it's important to know that a lot of like the inner workings of like the corporate structure within the corporate culture of TSR and the hatred for Dave Arneson, I suspect can only come from a few people. And when we interviewed Tim Kask, he was very, very adamant about like, yeah, I don't like the guy. I mean, even he didn't mince any words. So I'm not saying anything that's not.
Yeah.
I got the video to back it up. That's all I'm going to say. Is that's what he said. I mean, and Wesely told me that same story. He was like, yeah, Tim used to sit behind Arneson and kick his chair during the meetings and try to physically intimidate him, was what I was told. And so Dave, being much shyer and much more timid, asked Wesely to come in because Wesely was military.
Yeah.
And just sit there and show him that there was a bigger guy right behind him.
So as far as trying to get the rules for Brownstein out of Wesely, how would you describe that process?
It's really hard because he knows how to run it. He invented it. He knows how to run it. He knows it inside out. What I had to do was take copious notes about what I knew from playing it and from the interviews I already had, and really drill down into like, what is the structure of a game design? What is going on here? And so when we would do the interviews, I'd be like, today we're going to talk about movement. How do you conduct movement? Or today we're going to talk about time. How do you do the passage of time in your games? Right.
Very important.
Yeah. And then, and then I asked him about combat, and I mean, he always reminds me like, well, I didn't ever plan to have a combat system in the game. It wasn't meant to have combat. Right. So that's another thing, is like, he just did that because that's what the players wanted. And that's something you do as a designer too, as you play test and you see what the players want to do.
Does he does it now? Does he have rules for combat? And what rules would you say he uses? Like OD&D?
No, he uses, it's kind of a variant on Strategos, really, on his version of Strategos.
There's a few versions of it, right? Like that.
Yeah,
it's not the original.
Yeah, it's not Strategos by Totten. It's Strategos N by Wesely.
Strategos N.
Yeah, and what he does is it's like a die roll system, and you roll dice based on the number of units you have.
D6s.
Yeah, just D6s, and it's like a dice pool system. Like, only instead of totaling the dice, it's like if you have like infantry units. If you roll a 1, you wipe out one of the other side's infantry units.
Okay.
And then, if I recall correctly, I got to ask him about the morale. I think he's got a morale system. So after a turn of combat, you check morale, see if the weaker side runs away or submits, actually gives up and submits.
But that wasn't part of the original. That's just, he did it in response to people wanting to fight. Originally, it was just going to be social.
Yeah, it was just social interaction, And then with Jim Clark and Arneson come in, and they're like, we want to have a duel. And Wesely was like, I just, he says it in the movie, I just quickly thought up some system, and which was probably like some die rolls that if you got a 1, you got to kill, right?
Yeah.
Or you got to, maybe it was 2 dice, or something, but something really simple, because they really understood dice mechanics.
Yeah.
So, you can do a game with percentages using 2d6 if you know what the breakdown of probabilities are. You round some of them, but there's, I think it's like a Snake Eyes or a Boxcars is something like a 1.8% or something like that. I forgot. I used to have it memorized. And so you can treat that as a 1 or 2% roll, So, yeah.
Okay. So how would you differ?
We're so serious tonight.
I know we are. It's been a day like that. Maybe
it's been really grim.
Deep breath. Hey, well, it sounds like you got some work done, though. You were telling me a little bit before we hit record. You got some work done on Rob Kuntz's module that's going to be debuting at Arnecon too.
Yeah, that's really cool too, because that's the idea of having somebody who was so integral to Greyhawk, and Rob's been posting stuff on his Twitter account for 3 Line Studios that are links to him doing write-ups years ago about his involvement with Greyhawk and with Gary. And so he was right there, at the ground zero along with Gary and Dave when all of this was being developed.
I got to say, that was one of the funniest things that happened on Twitter this week. I don't know who was talking to him, but they didn't recognize who he was from 3 Line. And they made some arrogant comment like, I've been playing role-playing games before you were a kid or something like that. And he was like,
that's a cut and paste. Yeah.
Man, that was so hilarious. Like, dude,
it's like,
you clearly do not know who you're
Rob
talking
Kuntz. To. Yeah, you've been playing. Like, do you remember the Greyhawk supplement? That's the guy.
He was there when Arneson showed Gary the game for the first time he was playing, right? Like, nobody predates that.
Well, and he probably heard about Blackmore as a role-playing game from Arneson before Gary even heard about it, because there's an exchange of letters, which I used the letter that Rob had sent as a reply to Dave, because that's what existed in the Dave archive.
Yeah.
And so, and it's the one that ends with Eek, there's a Balrog coming or something like that. And then we recently at the last Arnecon were given all those papers that are in this book, which some of them are like are write-ups of the very first fantasy RPG adventures. And so the write-up that Rob was referencing is in that book. And when I showed it to Rob, because I gave him scans of all the stuff, I was like, you're going to want to use these for some of your research. So here you go. I mean, that's the other thing, is like, if you're like doing significant research, I'll share my stuff with you. All you got to do is tag it and say, I got it from Secrets of Blackmore. I just want a citation. That's all, of provenance.
So I did want to ask you, if you don't mind going into the book for just a second.
No.
Page 37 and 38, the Spanish Royals character matrix.
Yeah.
And so we got the Kingdom of Spain here, and we've got Kurt the First, Queen Mother, Regent Wife, and they're rated on looks, brains, sex,
Can you
gut.
see that at all out there?
Yep.
And is
That's
it reversed
exactly
though? Sometimes the camera reverses it.
Here, hold it up for a second. I'm going to switch up the view and see. Oop, not me. How do I put you up there?
Yeah, just so people can see what we're talking about.
I'm really struggling. Sorry, man. Hang on just a second.
That's all right. Well, maybe somebody out there can, Anyway, it's a list of attributes.
There we go.
It's a series, like along the top row, you have all these attribute descriptions that are, interestingly enough, 6 attributes, just like in D&D.
Yeah, it looks.
And down the side, you have the list of characters, and it also includes, like, I think that when they were born, maybe. Is it a birth or a death? Yeah, it's a birth. And then out here, there's an M, which would indicate a marriage.
Yeah. 1792.
Yeah, it happened.
Which was also interesting to me as well. Like that's from another part of the book where they pretty much just put 1700 and then put the year that they were in to keep track of what year it was in Blackmore. But the thing I wanted to read on page 37 says, I've opted to include this non-Blackmore document as an example of how Arneson was revolutionizing informal play technique, both within war games as well as his own Blackmore. The following text comes from our previously published Emergence of Blackmore poster set, and then this is a quote. At the same meeting, Arneson ran his Braunstein type game. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong. It's Braunstein, right? Brownstein type game. And he handed Dan Nicholson a slip of paper, now known as the Spanish Royals character matrix. It is the first example of character abilities being used by Arneson, who would roll dice against the abilities to determine if a personality in his Napoleonic campaign suffered a negative result. So, Kingdom of Spain was a Braunstein-like, or would you say?
Well,
it was
the Kingdom of Spain
Braunstein?
was it's a domain in a Napoleonic era, global campaign.
But the game itself, I'm trying to get to the definition. What's the difference between the Braunstein, which is what Dave is running at conventions right now, and what is considered a Braunstein, like Banania or Brownstone, Texas, or what? How do you differentiate who gets to use the term a Braunstein?
Well, I think that that's loaded, saying who gets to use the term.
Okay, I'm not trying to be emotional language.
I have no control over somebody using that term. If you do use the term and you're running a game without at least citing Wesely in some way or acknowledging that this is somehow based on his creation, I think you're kind of being, you're misappropriating the name.
Do you think people are doing that, like that they are saying that we made this up and we own this term, and
it's starting to look like they're claiming it as their own thing, which is something that I've seen a lot with these.
I did want to differentiate between your take and it. Well, let's first squash a rumor. You are not Dave Kahn, right? You two separate people.
No, that's Dave Kahn, but he's really good friends with Dave Wesely, and he's the kind of guy where if you said that kind of stuff in front of him in person, you might be laid out on the floor. Okay. Like you're going to, like that's the I'm not saying he would do that, but he would certainly be the kind of person who might want to do that. I can't say what he's going to do, but he's sticking up for his buddy. And so, he caught a lot of heat for things he said on the internet today. And
I think he did. And
I'm going to stick up for him and say, I want friends like that when somebody shows up and is kind of like rude to me in any way, is like, you mess with him and I've got his back. So just remember that I'm over here.
Right on. Yeah. So you're gonna sit behind the guy that's kicking his chair, right?
Yeah.
So because I feel like a lot of the heat that you got were people applying what he said to what you had said, because I think it's subtle, but there's a difference, because he came out and said that they are stealing IP. And from what
on a certain level, I think that misappropriating a title of a game for a game that isn't what it is a form of theft. Okay.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to clear that up, because from what I'd seen you say, I'd seen you say that
what I'm saying is an opinion, right? And what he said is
inaccurate
opinion.
And it's disrespectful, were the two things that I heard you say.
Yeah, I think it's inaccurate. Like I said earlier, it's like your elf game or your game of Risk is not Brownstein.
So,
or else prove it to me.
What is your definition? What is your definition of Brownstein?
Brownstein is a game that is a simulation game, like a lot of early war games, and it simulates social conflict. And in the scenarios, it's a scenario-based game. Usually, you're in a place where the social fabric of your society is about to collapse, and you're about to see a major social upheaval, like your country is about to be invaded by the French, or there's going to be a major coup, and the government is going to shift as far as who's the local despot running your little country that you live in.
So it has an eve of upheaval kind of vibe where something huge is about to go down.
It has a real, the best way to describe it is that you begin the game like a story or a movie that is in media res, which is things are already happening, and then you've got to figure out what's going on. There's no prologue of I don't know, just here I am, the farm boy on the farm, and now I'm going to go over to the city. I'm going to meet some people. We're going to go to the dungeon. It's boom, you're in a bad situation. What are you going to do?
So you've played these. Do the players get a goal handed to them, or is it up to them to make up a goal for themselves?
everybody is created by the referee.
Right. So the referee, it's all
So
pre-gen.
it's all pre-generated, and so you're given a situation that you've got to deal with that you haven't planned for. You're randomly given a character, and you have to cope with being with whatever that person's goals, their enemies, your secrets.
Is there like a little feeling at the beginning of almost being overwhelmed? Like, man, there's like, because like these things are 22 people, right? Like, it's not just like a party of 5 playing.
Well, you really want to play it over a period of about 8 hours, okay?
Okay.
And when he runs it at a convention, he never has enough time to do that. So what he hands you is a character description, which usually, like, I'm usually playing it on a Sunday at GaryCon, and I'm just wrecked. And I've got to read this like whole page character description of who I am, what I like to do,
So you get a
where I
backstory.
like to. You get backstory about yourself and everything. You know, you're created. You're like, you slide into this person, right? And so, yeah, so that's one of the things he does, and that's very different from any other role-playing game.
That's a lot of prep, sounds like.
It's all prepped, you know. And I mean, I might be giving away a little bit too much, but I'm sure everybody who hears about it will want to buy the book when it comes out anyway, because they want to see what did Wesely do, right?
If I could pre-order it, I would.
Yeah, well, we'll give you a chance in a few months.
Right on.
But yeah, I mean, you know, it's a very different game from what a lot of people perceive it as. When I was I went on Joy of Wargaming's podcast, and nice guy, but he was fixated on the fact that, like, when I look through this book, I go on this page and it says Brownstein here, you know, and it's like, if you spend a lot of time doing research on an individual for like a really in-depth, serious research documentary, you start to understand how they phrase things. Like,
yeah,
you know, I have like, I think it's like 14 hours or something like that of Dave Arneson giving school lectures, and I've watched that at least twice. Okay.
Wow.
And so I know what Dave Arneson's like his sense of humor is like, and you know, he's got kind of a dry nerd sense of humor where he's being so sardonic that it doesn't even seem like he's telling a joke. It just seems like he's being a nerd, right? And so like, when, you know, the famous line about when they were like, well, did you type up Dungeons and Dragons? And Dave Arneson said, no, I never typed a single word of Dungeons and Dragons. Well, he got Gail to do all the typing for him. He did all his writing by hand, right? But he just straight faced like, yeah, I never typed anything in Dungeons and Dragons. And they threw it back at him like, see, he didn't do anything for Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, no,
oh my gosh,
no.
They just didn't get the joke.
Yeah, they didn't get the joke. Well, I
so let's clear that up right now, because that's another misconception. And I was, if you remember my video, I was struggling along the same lines as Mr. Wargaming, because they didn't know what else to call this brand new thing. So they called everything a Braunstein. Yeah. But you made it sound like there came a time when they started differentiating.
Well, I think that he differentiates it really early on. They have, because the Browns, I mean, these guys are really hardcore gamers. They know that, you know, Arneson's already designed games by this point, right?
Okay.
He's got his own naval war game that he's been running. He's been cobbling together stuff from British war gamers and modifying them to create his own games, you know. And like, some people will say that like that character sheet idea comes from there was Hyboria, I think, was a game. But Arneson is using it differently, you know. And his play style is like, his play mechanisms are really different than like Hyboria was still like a war game. But anyway, where were we going with this? Yeah, so when they're talking about, you know, when you read about the references, like, there's a bunch of references in there to Blackmore. There's a bunch of references in there to Brownstein, and there's a bunch of sort of cross-mix references.
Yeah. One of my favorite images in the book is just a tiny slip of paper inviting people to a medieval Brownstein. And it's the first invitation to Blackmore.
Yeah.
Like, man, what a find that was. Like, I don't know.
That was in corner of the tabletop. That was just an excerpt from corner, like a full page corner of the tabletop that we took.
Oh, okay. So that was a newsletter. That wasn't like a personal invitation.
Yeah, they had their own fanzine, and so that would be published in there.
I'm such a nerd.
Well, no, I mean, I've had those for, you know, 15 years now, maybe, or something like that. I don't know. I started in 2012, so yeah, about 15 years. And that, when I first saw those, I was just like, oh my god, you know, this is so cool. This is the origin, right?
Yeah.
But then you kind of like, it's really hard to, you have to get really, well, we would go into like another 3 hour show if we wanted to talk about specific origins. But as
Okay.
far as
Well, we don't need to.
as far
As
as
far as
the
the definition of
references to
Braunstein.
Brownstein, you know,
Yeah.
when Wesely runs his Brownstein, the two Brownsteins he's running are Braunstein, which is set in the Prussian town of Braunstein,
Hmm.
and then the other one is known as Banania, which is set in the country of Banania, and I think it might even be the city of Banania, in Banania.
Yes.
Um, and they're very similar. The only difference is like how you talk to other people and how you move around the board. Okay, and so there's like one fundamental difference. The really good way to compare the two is like you look at what Wesley's doing and what Arneson's doing. And so Wesley's still using a map, and he still wants people to be on a map and to move pieces around on a map, right?
Yeah.
Because he wants to be able to track what everybody's doing, or at least where they are. And whereas Arneson does the thing where everybody gets in a group together, and they go off as a party together to do an adventure, right? So that's a very
Yeah.
different thing. So like, you know, like when I hear about the Brosser bunch doing what they are calling a Brownstein, I'm like, it sounds more like one of Arneson's split party adventures or
Well,
something like that.
So there, that does beg a question, though. Like, what is it that you understand that they're doing? Because from what I understand, you've been pretty much blocking anyone with the BroSR hashtag.
Well,
Now, in
that's
my
because
case,
they're
it's not a
jackasses most of the time.
yeah, guilty as charged.
Not all of them, but a lot of them are
Well, I
jackasses,
mean,
and
you
you admit
blocked
that.
me a couple times, but your blocks don't seem permanent. At least in my case,
If
I don't know
you're,
what I did to get back on your good side. Appreciate it.
you just seem like you were having fun and you weren't treating people like crap. You know,
Well, yeah,
I
I think
mean,
we should all be having fun. I feel like the Venn diagram between OSR and BroSR is like a it's like a synth wave circle. It's got a little bit of pink on one side and a little bit of cyan on the other. There's like
right?
99% of the stuff we are the same, and that we fight like Wolverines over the 1% that we
Well, all you got to do
disagree.
is be nice to people, and they'll like listen to what you got to say. But if you, they're not going to pay attention to you if you act hostile. And I've seen a lot of hostility. You know,
So
and
let's assume. Do you think it's possible? And let's not talk about whether the BroSR is already doing this or not. But like,
okay,
from what you understand of a Brownstein, if somebody was playing an ongoing campaign,
that right,
and
that right there is a failure. That is not a
okay, well, let's
Braunstein.
can we just stay with me for a second before I lose you? So they've got their party, they've got their players, but over the course of the campaign, these high level NPCs have started to show up. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the vampire queen down in the bottom of the pit, and the mummy lord over in the next round. And they decided, you know what, we want to have a one night event. We're going to put the players away for a minute. We're going to take the big toys out of the box, and we're going to assign each person one of the patrons, if you will, and just do something to upend the apple cart of the status quo of the campaign. It's all right, big name players, you've got troops, you've got a reason to get together and hash stuff out. Could you use a Braunstein like
That is not.
approach?
I've already told a bunch of brokers that that is not the Brownstein approach. That is the Arneson approach to running a
What's
military
different?
campaign.
What's different about it?
The difference is that you're a high level person and you're operating your minions. You know, your little people. You know, like you're the king of the realm. You
Okay.
don't go out and fight the battle yourself. You don't go out with the navy if you're smart. You send your general or your admiral out with the navy, and they fight the battle for you, which is what Arneson was doing with his Napoleonic campaign in like 1970. I mean, they were doing campaigns like that even before that.
So
I
that's
think
more like a war game that's tied to a conventional campaign rather than
it's kind of a mixture of like the domain games, like what the hell is the one that was really popular? Diplomacy. Okay,
yeah.
like you take a diplomacy. In fact, Arneson's map of Europe is drawn up. He took a map of Europe and he drew borders just like the diplomacy map on it, and each player got one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody was a country, and then the countries, if you had extra players like Gary Gygax and what's his name? Uh, Rob Kuntz and I forgot his name, the guy that was part of GNK, Gygax and K. It was K. They ran the United States, right? And so, like, I think Rob might have been the Secretary of State, and Gygax was the president, and you know, the other guy was like the Minister of War or something, or you know, the person in charge of the military or whatever. And so you'd have these countries where you could have like people on the team together, and they were like different. They were representing different functions of the government, right? And so it was really essential for those that you had like really strict budget records and really strict time records. So we got a lot of. I mean, there's so much stuff out there, and we didn't have the budget for an archivist, so we didn't archive everything we saw when we made the movie.
So would it be fair to say that, like a true Brownstein, you are playing a faction of one, that you don't have troops, you don't have resources other than just your dude at the and whatever's on your backstory?
Some of you might have troops, but not all of you.
Okay.
But it's not designed like a war game, okay? It's designed for the social interaction. And so if you're a person of great power, of course you're going to have some troops, whether it's like a few soldiers, a few men-at-arms for one of the characters in Brownstein, or a couple, not even a brigade, like a couple platoons of like Marines, or a couple helicopters for the Air Force, you know. And so you can utilize those, but you're not, you know, you're in a city, so you're not conducting warfare under the same sort of conditions that a war game would conduct warfare.
It's the night before warfare, right?
It's the night before like social upheaval, you know.
Yeah.
Or it is the day of social upheaval. The game ends and everything is gone to hell. You know, like church towers on fire, somebody's blown up the Capitol building, gunboats are going up and down the river. The populace, which are the NPCs that you never deal with, but they're streaming into the jungle for cover because all the big heavies are going at it to determine who's gonna win.
Yeah.
You know. And so that's kind of the simulation, is like, it is a simulation of like kind of human societies, really. And so, yeah,
it gets really nuanced, doesn't it? It gets really, differences get really.
Well, I think it's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the real Brownstein, I think, is just a fabulous, wonderful thing, because it, you know, if you wanted to like explore the possibilities, even in present day political situations, you could create a Brownstein sort of situation where, you know, it's sort of like the UN game in a way, you know.
I feel like there's some of those old games are set up more along the lines of what you're talking about. Like, they don't make sense in a convention. Like Boot Hill and Gangbusters seem to be more Brownsteinish than RPG-ish to me.
The big difference too is that with Brownstein, you don't need the referee.
Okay.
Unless you were going to do something.
Well, because the first one happened, right? And didn't he feel like a failure because he got out of control on him?
Wesley's first one?
Yeah.
Well, it's because he was trying to control. Well, you have a referee, but you don't need the referee. And that's a really big distinction. So, yeah, and these are the sorts of little distinctions I'm talking about, where it's like, yeah, you want to ask me whether I think you're doing a Brownstein, and I will tell you that you are not doing a Brownstein. Is your referee there with you, and you're telling the referee everything you're doing so they can track what you're doing? Like, I'm going to go over to this room. I'm going to go.
Are you asking like what I've experienced in them?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, in the ones that I've been in, it's they've been online, and it's in a Discord server.
Right.
And so there's like the main general room that everyone's in.
Right.
And the referee will say, all right, you two come with me to this other channel. And then the rest of us are kind of kibitzing in the main channel. While we're waiting on that, some of us may say, hey, you want to go to channel 4 with me and we can hash some stuff out. And so like we will oftentimes get way ahead of the referee in the little.
See, the players that are doing that are doing something closer to what a Brownstein is than.
It feels very similar
than what your referee is doing.
From playing those. It feels very similar because, like, oftentimes, like you're saying, you don't really need the referee. You only really need him when you get to cross purposes and he needs to adjudicate something going down.
The only time I see Wesely step into a Brownstein game once it's launched is to announce like that a turn is ended if you're playing in Banania. Time isn't really tracked in Braunstein. You just play, and it's considered to be like the game starts at 9 a.m. and it ends at 9 p.m. or something like that, or midnight.
So it's like, is it like kind
And
of real time in the moment, or is it just kind of?
Well, see, and that's the other, BS thing of like time. 1-to-1 time is a bunch of crap.
Well, I wasn't trying to go there.
I know, but I'm going to go there. The 1-to-1 time, because I see the brosters running around. We're the only people doing 1-to-1 time. Yeah, whatever. You guys are idiots, because I listened to what's his name, your little leader guy, and he was like, well, we compress time, we stretch time, we freeze time, we do one, and I'm like, right, so you're not doing 1-to-1 time, so just quit bragging about it like you're.
Well, let's get that out there too. While I got you, what would you consider true 1-to-1 time?
True 1-to-1 time means that you're going to be called at 3 a.m. by somebody, and they're going to say the enemy is invading Grognardia, and what do you want? What do you want me to do as your general? And you tell him, and then he calls 30 other guys on the phone and wakes them up and their wives, and he says, it's 3 a.m., but we're being invaded in Grognardia, and we got to do something about it.
I'm sorry, honey. This is important.
Sorry, honey. I know you got to go to work in the morning, but we're playing real 1-to-1 time. That's 1-to-1 time. Anything else is time compression or time stretching or time freezing or whatever you want to call.
Take that.
Yeah. So that would be my, like, if you're going around bragging about this 1-to-1 time thing, I think you're an idiot. Okay.
So in your mind, 1-to-1 time is. I hope you're having fun with this. It looks like
I've been looking at the scroll and of the conversation. I think this must be, I don't know where this conversation ends up.
I didn't want to talk about 1-to-1 time, but let's do it.
Let's go back to the other thing we were talking about before the 1-to-1 time.
Well, let me just reference what you mentioned. That seems like 1-to-1 hour, whereas I believe 1-to-1 time in the DMG first edition, it's 1 day equals 1 day. So.
Well, it's hard to say what those guys really meant by a lot of that stuff. Like if you look at original D&D, which is what I use. I don't like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, and you've got a version here in Tannisburg as well, right? If people don't.
But in original Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax says an adventure takes, the time spent between adventures should be a week. Okay, and I really thought about that, and I started looking at like professional football players, right? They get the crap beat out of them in a game, and they spend about a week recovering.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like hit points in D&D are abstracted, and it's like, yeah, you can get your hit points back, but you're going to be bruised to crap still. Like if you had to, you could fight again, but if you're smart, you're not going to go back to the dungeon for another week. Right. And so I do a sort of thing where it's, I don't call it 1-to-1 time, but it's just like, it's a week recovery between adventures. And I do a lot of catch-up time. So if you want to do other things during that week, you can go shopping. You can go do this. You're not straining yourself going.
Oh man, I'm a big fan of having shopping happen between sessions instead of dragging everybody from shop to shop.
See, I had a new player that loved shopping, and everybody was like, oh, "Come on, can we just go to the dungeon so the DM can kill us, because this is killing us?"
He's running out of accents. Stop going to.
Yeah, he's running out of accents. I can only do 2. So
I've been learning Traveler again. I'm new to all this.
Yeah, Traveler's awesome.
Jeff Rowe's actually running a play-by-post Travelerstein.
That sounds great.
But one of the things that I appreciate about it
if you call it a Travelerstein, I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you I understand that you want to honor Wesely. Okay.
We do. We totally respect the guy.
So if you want to honor Wesely, you can just use the Stein name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is stone, and you can call it Broserstein. If you said we're playing Broserstein, I'd be like, right on.
I don't think anyone actually says Broser. I've heard it Bro-SR.
I can say Broser because I have pronounced things
not
phonetically.
To quibble.
Is it Bro-SR?
The thing I was going to bring up about Traveler that I thought was interesting that I haven't seen in Dungeons and Dragons, and maybe it's just because I don't know it deep enough, but like the concept of fatigue. The concept of fatigue when you are in melee, that like you can only keep up a sword fight for so long before you're both going to be just pushed. Right. I really like that from Traveler.
There are a lot of games that do that kind of stuff, and it may be in the DM's guide where Gary did he really went in depth on what hit points are and that he considers them to be abstraction. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things he talked about was like, we don't want to get so abstract that like now the dungeon master has to track that you're getting tired and you're not fighting as well.
So it's supposed to be rolled into the HP.
Well, and then if you consider, like, if two dudes are fighting each other, right? They're both getting tired.
Yeah.
So they're both going to go down in ability to defend themselves and ability to attack each other. So it kind of comes out. It comes out in the wash in the numbers. Unless you want to get really granular and say this guy's constitution is an 18 and this one is a 3. The guy with the 3 is going to be like really tired after 3 rounds, and the other guy can really wallop them for another 5.
Yeah.
Right?
If
you want to do that, you can do that.
It's diminishing returns, though, right? The more simulationist you go, the flow slows down.
Yeah, but no, it's yeah. What were we talking about before we got into the time thing?
Let's get back onto the definition of Brownstein.
Oh, it's a definition, yeah.
So I'm going to hit you with one that I've seen and see what your take on it is. Multiple independent actors operating in conflict under a fog of war.
That would be a good description.
Okay. You like that one?
Yeah, except for not everybody is in conflict. And in fact, it's much more like a real world in that you don't have good and evil. So like D&D is really predicated on the idea. Gary was very, very religious. So is Dave Arneson, for that matter, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are guys that keep a Bible by their bed because they're very faithful gentlemen. And,
which is so ironic that the satanic panic happened to them, right?
yeah.
Not to go in a different. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
No, but it's true. It's they were like, "What are you talking about? We're just having fun. We're not really doing the bad thing." And so, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, the good and evil thing. So Gary does the whole thing of like he introduces, because he's reading a lot of fantasy that's very black and white. Like even the Lord of the Rings, it doesn't really say good and evil, but it's like us and the bad guy. Yeah. Us and the bad guys, allies. The orcs are his troops and they are evil. They're inherently evil,
Or just aligned with those forces, right?
Yeah. There's a letter to somebody where he talks about how they represent evil and how they cannot be redeemed, actually. And so there are things that are evil and can't be redeemed, like, I don't know, and you go out on your porch and a wasp stings you. As far as you're concerned, it's evil and you can't be redeemed. It's I'm going to talk to it and let's pet the mosquitoes. They're our friends now. Yeah, they're just, they are what they are. But in Brownstein, you don't really have this idea of good and evil because Wesely is much more nuanced than that. And so he has situations where, like, my friend is my ally, but unfortunately, my friend is friends with a friend of my worst enemy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit of a problem for me because I got friends that are friends with my worst enemy. Imagine being the friend and the friend of a friend who have to deal with the fact that their two friends, these other friends, are like just want to annihilate each other, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of like mixed, like Wesley's games are full of like weird, convoluted relationships that create either like positive relationships where people are helping each other, or the inverse of that.
Well, that's what's delicious about it.
That. Yeah,
I got a taste of that playing. Fluid the Druid ran a Gangbuster Stein, and he put all the pieces in play. We had mob bosses, we had prohibition forces, we had the FBI, we had police that were on the mob's payroll. I got to play a newspaper, so I was trying to get the stories, right?
Right.
And when you're talking about the Wesely version, it's one thing to be like, well, I would never play an evil character. I'm a good person in real life, and but like when you get handed that sheet that says you are in charge of the Irish mafia, you're worried about the Italian mafia horning in on your
you don't even get to choose. Like
you got to play that, and like now you are considering a position that you normally wouldn't even have to play with, but you've got to take them serious, and you got to look at, okay, what are the things that they're worried about?
So I got to ask you this. This is a big question here. How come the browser jackasses can call a game that's using one name a what's the name of the game you played? You called it
It
a
was
something Stein.
what we would have called a battle Braunstein in Gangbusters, the 1980.
But you said it was a gangbuster
Gangbuster
Stein.
Stein. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you call that? And you can't just simply say we are going to play a Brownstein style game, but it's going to be our game, and we're going to call it, a Brownstein.
I'm perfectly happy to do that. Like,
that's my only thing right there. Is like,
yeah.
if you guys say we don't know exactly what he was doing, but we're trying to do something like what he was doing,
we're trying to
call it something else.
We saw your movie, and we got inspired.
Right.
And I want to say, I know that they've made you roll your eyes a lot, but from what I've seen in the Bro SR, they love your work. And they are inspired, and they want to go back to the style of play that you showed the world that it seemed like everybody had forgotten. And so we're trying to take the pieces that have come out so far and put it back into the game we've been playing.
Right.
So,
right. No, I get that. I think that's great.
I do think that people need to be patient, because you are working on it, and you are doing the zooms, and you're taking the notes, and Brownstein is coming out.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. It's a debate. The big debate is like, what will make more money? And Harmony's in there saying she called something out. God, Harmony. If you're using the Braunstein name, no.
Gingerstein.
Call it Gingerstein.
Harmony.
I love you.
All right, fair enough. But from making a money point of view, though, I would posit to you that I don't see other communities that care about this stuff as much as the Bro SR. Like, that's why it's a little puzzling to me that you've been somewhat antagonistic to who would be your most rabid fans. Like, people.
Well, I used to try to talk to Jeffro, and he is really strange. He doesn't really talk directly to people, and so when he gave me the brush off, I was like, okay, I won't talk to you anymore because you're not talking to me. And then I started talking to Broser guys, and they started acting like jackasses, and so I was like, click block.
Okay.
Click block.
Fair enough.
And so if you're going to act like jackasses, you're going to get treated like it. You're going to get sent. Off you go. I'm talking to you because you don't act like a jackass.
Well, not right now. I'm not going to say.
Well, there's context. I mean, that's, like if you're a child, you don't know the difference between I'm talking in a social situation. Like I'm at dinner with friends, and we're going to act, our wives are here. We're going to act like civilized gentlemen, and
I feel like
the women
and
gamers are going to act polite.
Viciously disagree about a point, but we could still sit down and roll dice together and have a good time. That's the vibe I get from you.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this game, this book, Treacherous Play by Marcus Carter?
No. When was
I've
that
been trying
released?
to get him on the channel. He's an Australian academic. The book is he covers 2 video games and a TV show. So he covers EVE Online and DayZ are the video games, and then the TV show is Survivor. But basically, he talks about places where treacherous play is permitted and how it changes the game. And I've been thinking about this in terms of these Brosersteins or Braunstein or whatever. The concept that you have to make relationships with people in the game, in your character, and you don't know if you can trust them or not. And you have to decide which ones I'm going to trust and which ones I'm going to betray before.
That's another fundamental thing with Wesley's game is that Wesely, every war game, for the most part, all the games were zero sum. And so like you add up the victory points. And whoever's got, the winner is there's a winner. And so Wesley's approach was a game where the game just ends. And then you just talk to everybody, and it's like, well, what was your objective? And it was like, well, my objective was just to like carry a bunch of, I don't know, gallons of milk across town without any of them breaking. Did you do it? Yeah. You won. You're a winner,
Right on. So is that
somebody else? And so everybody has that sort of like potential to be a winner or feel like a winner because he's not really doing a lot of like, you're getting taken out of the game through combat.
So when you went on Mollison's show, you mentioned that Wesely would grade people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how it happens? Do you just have like a conversation at the end, and he goes around and asks people what their goals were, and then tells them how well he thought they did? Or,
well, if you look at Wesley's, I published the stuff that I got from John Peterson that was like a couple sheets, or maybe 2 sheets about Brownstone, Texas. And when I
Okay.
got him from John, he was like, you know, what you're gonna see might not seem like a role playing game to you because it has a lot of information about scoring on it. It's like really heavily scored game, right? And so they kind of were struggling with that, and Wesely doesn't really score the game. He's more concerned with ultimately with everybody having a good time playing the game. You know,
Okay.
like if there are certain times that, like when I talked to him, he was like, you know, there's sometimes a player won't be able to figure out how to get out of jail, and he'll be like,
Mhm.
I've had games where I go and like at 90 minutes later, everybody's out of jail except for one guy that can't figure out how to get out of jail. You know, so then he'll be like, I'll go talk to somebody else and be like, oh, part of your wins, or you know, like it's not like he's cheating, but he's just like he'll remind somebody like, oh, you're worried about your nephew that was put in jail. Shouldn't you be checking on him, right?
Mhm.
And so then that person goes and talks to the jailer and figures out a way to like convince the jailer to let the kid out of jail, that player, so that player can then start working on their other victory conditions. But they're not really victory conditions. They're just like things that motivate the character, like a list of things that will motivate you to do things. You know, it's sort of like a loaded sandbox. It's not like you just go in and you got to figure out what to do. It's like you go in and you're already told, like, well, your job is to go do this, and your job is to go
Yeah.
do that.
Whereas I feel like if you apply those to an ongoing campaign, people can come in already with an idea of, oh, I know what this guy's after. I know, everyone kind of already understands what the giants in Steddington are all about,
Right.
right? So you don't
Well,
need
the
to have like
difference
that
is that
catch up.
in an ongoing campaign, you wouldn't want to do that because so much is predicated on like the play that involves investigating something. I'm reading like the scroll. It's just kind of hilarious.
They can be very
Investigating
distracting just from
investigating things.
previous videos.
Yeah, well, I just saw some stupid comments. So I was like, oh, that one must be a browser. But investigating things to find out information.
Time out for a second. Time out for a second.
What?
You're like, oh, these guys are jackasses and stuff. You got to be nice to people. And now you're like, these guys are all stupid.
Oh yeah. Well, the browsers. Everybody knows that browsers like a good kicking.
Iron sharpens iron, my brother.
Yeah. Well, the difference between a troll and somebody that has a good sense of humor is like the trolls can't handle being trolled back. Like you can troll me and I'll troll you back even harder. And so we have a lot of
Trolls
history.
regenerate.
Me and you and you browsers have a lot of history. And
Yeah, we do.
so yeah, and so you
I
already know that
really
I
do
think that
wish
you're
that
all
I could be a
jackasses.
bridge because, as I said,
No, they'll just step on you. Watch out.
well, they probably will. But like, here's the thing. I honestly think that the reason that we fight so hard is because we passionately care about the stuff that you care about. And so I'm
Right.
hopeful that there's a bright future, maybe way down the road, but down the road
Yeah,
where
but
we
all
can
the
see eye
browsers
to
have
eye.
such issues with like low T and stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, yeah. Um, and it's really something you shouldn't let affect your life too much.
It
But
doesn't.
yeah,
It doesn't.
no, I mean, I think that the big thing with the browsers is that you guys come around, you act like you're doing something nobody else has ever done. A person like me who has a really deep knowledge of like the history of these games will look at what you're doing. Like I proclaimed when you guys came around and said 1-to-1 time, woo! And I said, no, you can't do it. It's impossible. You're doing stretch time. You're doing time compression. You're doing time freezes. You can't. It doesn't work. People have tried it in the past. You can find old articles. I'm not even talking about myself. Like reading articles by other people that were DMs, and they were like, I'm struggling with time in my campaign because I got 30 PCs going all over the place and I don't
Well,
know what to do, right?
the
And so
counter to that would be like, why?
but the big thing is that all the browsers run around acting like they invented it, right? And that's where I have a problem. If you're like, yeah, we're really enjoying doing this thing and we're using this, this, and this, and I'd be like, yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad you're doing that because it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of effort to do that kind of gaming.
It's so. I'll just tell you about my journey, and I'm not like I said. I'm new to this stuff. You guys take the
Yeah.
stuff I say with a huge grain of salt because I'm still learning. Um, I started off with 5e when I got into it, and it was just unsatisfying. I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know what it was, but the play wasn't fun. I wasn't thinking about it outside of games. I was running games as a DM, and like I had to like spend a whole lot of time catching people up. The pause time was driving me nuts. 3 people come, and then the next time one guy can't make it, but the other guy could who wasn't there. So I got to figure out how to teleport people into the dungeon, all of those things. And so then I was like, well, the OSR is the answer. And so I was reading 10-Foot Pole. I was watching Questing Beast.
That's good.
And I just found I was
I mean, those are good sources.
They are for buying a yard of books that you'll never play.
Right.
And so I have a ton of stuff that I couldn't get my 5e guys to play. And I thought they were great ideas. It's fun to read. And then I start seeing these guys on Twitter with the hashtag BroSR, and they're talking about what happened.
I think I remember when you joined up with them, actually, because it wasn't
Brovenloft. It was about October 2 years ago. Brovenloft was going on.
Yeah.
And I started catching
up. That was when
up
I blocked you originally.
This is so fun.
I know.
I started seeing guys where 4 different campaigns were hooking up, and characters were passing back and forth between them. And Joy of Wargaming, they actually had they had Elric of Melniboné's sword was in the game and causing all kinds of trouble, and they tried to throw the sword into the sun, right? And then but at this point it was in an axe campaign, and if you know Macris's Auran setting, the sun is not just the sun, it's a god, right? And so they were like, that sword is a soul drinker. What happens when a demigod containing sword that sucks the souls out of people hits a god? And so then they were like, well, we got to make sure that doesn't happen. The sun's not just going to take it. He's going to marshal his forces. And then all the bad guy players were like, well, we're going to make sure it gets in there. And so they had Mollison war game out. How long is it going to, they knew, because they were playing 1-to-1 time, they knew the day that the sword was going to hit the sun. And they said, all right, if the sword goes in, then it won't kill the god, but it will seriously weaken him, and it means that all of the evil characters in all of your campaigns that are connected will get a bonus, and the good guys will get nerfed.
See, I think that's fun. I don't have a problem with that.
I thought that was amazing, and I was like, I want to hear about this kind of gaming. And so I started connecting with those guys, and they said, dude, you have got to watch Secrets of Blackmoor. You're not going to know anything about what we're doing if you don't start there. Mm-hmm. And so I watched the video, and I saw for me the most interesting thing about the whole thing is the Braunstein angle. And so maybe we're not getting it exactly right with the title, but like by
I think that's the problem is
near the stuff you taught us, we are having the kind of crazy fun that was missing for me in all of the stuff that I'd done before. So that's why I'm excited about it. That's why I got a thick skin when they give me some ribbon and stuff, because like my eyes are like just full of stars with the kind of experiences I'm able to have. And like in my mind, you and your work is such a huge part of that. It's for me, it's cognitive dissonance to see you guys sparking off each other like this. I'm like, you guys, this is what's going on.
Well, I mean, I think if the majority of the Broser jackasses understood that they're not inventing anything new, and they just stopped acting like jackasses, then
okay. Well, let's just get that on the record. They are not inventing anything new. They are trying to rediscover, but I feel like there is a sense that a lot of them feel betrayed, that people that knew about the old deep magic didn't pass it on. That all that we got was 5th edition and OSR.
That's the
why did it take? Why is it taking Wesely 50 years to get the original Brownstein rules out? Why did we have to wait for that?
Well, I think his game was being suppressed for 30 years.
Holy crap. Yeah?
Well, I don't think anybody wanted to talk about his games. Like TSR was very nice to Wesely. They did give him wonderful reviews for his Source of the Nile game that he wrote with Ross Maker, right?
But that's going to be at Arnecon 2 as well, yeah?
And I'm sure they knew about the existence of Brownstein, because that's what people talked about. Arneson talks about, I got my ideas from David Wesely's Brownstein.
It was the nucleus.
But it's kind of weird because it's like it is a nucleus, but Wesely's game goes this direction and Arneson goes this way. Like the way they handle the games is different. And so like in the beginning, Arneson is using Wesely ideas. There are some town games where people are people in the town and they're playing against each other like a Brownstein, right?
Yeah.
So there's the McGarry story about the stealing the merchant's stash in the warehouse. And they're sort of playing a little bit more like a Brownstein, but there's a lot more referee involvement. The way McGarry describes it is like, Dave takes him aside and he described, like, yeah, you're down in there, but you can hear this noise coming to there. You can hear people running in upstairs, right? And so what he's doing is a lot like what Arneson did during the first dungeon adventure, which is, and this is another thing where people say like Arneson wasn't really running a dungeon like the D&D game. But basically what Arneson was doing was he had a split party, and one party was the good guys and one party was the bad guys.
Yeah.
So he would go into one room with the good guys, and so that's why I keep saying, like, why don't you guys just say that you're doing like an early Blackmore style? Like you're going back to Blackmore roots with these because you're doing a mixed play style. You're not doing a
I feel like
pure
with
Brownstein.
all the hostility that there's been, and again, Twitter is a place for getting over your skis and that kind of stuff. But can you tell me that if we said, "Hey, we are playing a Blackmore," can you tell me that Dave Con wouldn't get online and say you are dishonoring Dave Arneson's memory by these Broasar jackasses stealing the Blackmore name?
I don't think so, because I think that he would, if it would have to do with your tone, like if you're like, well,
yeah,
we really like what Dave Arneson did, we watched Secrets of Blackmore, we got this book, and we love all the stuff that people were doing in the early days. So what we're doing is we're trying, we're simulating to the best of our abilities what Dave Arneson was doing when he started Blackmore.
And I don't know a better source than you guys. Like, I mean, famously, WotC had their 50-year, and there may be good stuff in that book.
I mean, I think the Dave Con guy might have been friends with Dave Arneson too. So when like he's really tight in with that group. So when people get upset with him,
you get
upset,
protective about your friends, and especially if your friend is a celebrity, right?
Or
like
your friend has passed away and is a celebrity. There's like so much BS around that,
Yeah.
But all you got to do is be respectful about what you're doing, So when I started hearing, back to the whole Brownstein thing, I'm just going to reiterate, when I started hearing people saying we're playing Brownstein, I was like, no, you're not, And then I would be like, what you're doing sounds a lot more like Dave Arneson's Napoleonic campaigns, and it sounds a lot more like Blackmore, early on Blackmore.
Yeah.
And it also sounds a lot like what Rob Kuntz describes early in Greyhawk.
Yeah.
That write-up that he just recently reposted, that I posted to my Twitter.
I am so glad that he's active on Twitter right now, like that we still have him and that he's able to share his perspectives and stuff. That's really awesome. I'm gonna take blame for dragging him over there, because he was mostly on Facebook, and I was like, dude, you gotta come over to Twitter. It's a lot freer over there. Yeah, Timothy Imholt sent me a link to Facebook, and I was like, did you mean to do that? You almost got me on Facebook. I don't know if we can be friends anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we were supposed to like create all this hostility and disagreement. But there's agreement as to, like, I don't have a problem with what the Brosers are doing. I wanted to do that stuff. I still want to do that stuff. I would love to play like a game I've kind of had floating in my head. It isn't like a full campaign, but I would love to run a battle where the forces begin like one side is given orders and they're told, you need to go and invest this town and protect this town.
Yeah.
Right. And these are your forces. Here's, you get to see the map because you get to go down there and look around, and you're there and you're going to dig trenches and you're going to like do all kinds of stuff. And then the other side, it's like, okay, here's a map. It's not a very accurate map. You've got to figure out how to do whatever you need to do to raid that town. And then we do the back and forth DMing, the secret DMing, and maybe even do it through email so it can go on for like a month,
Yeah.
And so like I would really love to set it like in the Civil War era, American Civil War era, because it's a really fascinating time period for wargaming.
There's just another dimension when you realize that you're playing against another group of players, that you're going up against a player scheme as opposed to a prepackaged scenario or something the DM had to make up both sides of.
Yeah.
They get to make stupid mistakes that the DM would never make, but they also get to think of crazy stuff the DM would never come up with.
Right. So. Well, and you get the advantage of, like, if you're combining, like, say, a war game, like the whole point, the fog of war was what the Blackmore bunch were trying to do, the MMSA, and I forgot what the group before the MMSA was. I didn't list it in the movie because it was too much detail, but they just wanted to create a game where they could do like devious things, where the battle could be won even before you end up on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Because a good general can come up with a crazy scheme.
Crap.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever read any of the writings about the the Valley campaign by what's his name, Stonewall Jackson in the Civil War, like,
Hmm.
there's all the baggage, the political baggage, and all that we have of today. But for his time period, he is an astounding military mind, and he would do things like march his troops, like see, that's the thing I would put in the rules. I wouldn't tell the players, but like, if you march your troops faster, they will go farther in a day, but you're going to have more stragglers. But the ones who don't straggle are going to go up in morale
Yeah.
because they're like, the ones you've got left are the tough guys. And like the stuff that Stonewall Jackson did with his whole contingent of the Southern Army was kind of like what the special forces and the SEALs do to train their soldiers now. It's like, you're going to go through this rigorous training and 90% of you are going to fall out, but the 10% that don't fall out, you guys are going to be like a force of one,
Yeah.
each of you, and yeah, stuff like that you can introduce into a game to make the game more exciting, um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to play stuff like that. It's hard to get people together to play that. It's hard to find
It
people
is.
that are into. It's hard to find people that are into like kind of a higher level game, because that also takes dedication of, I'm going to dedicate 4 hours a week to playing my war game,
Yeah,
right?
that's one of the biggest problems is there's so much cool things to try, but each one of them is going to take 4 hours a night,
I
right?
mean, there's some great war games out there. Like we played it a couple times. Pax Britannica. It's set in the colonial era,
Hmm.
and it's a whole map of the world, and everybody represents a global power. And you're going around doing the bad thing, which is you're setting up colonies all over the world and theoretically oppressing people. But it's all about the shenanigans that go on as you try to vie for your positioning, your nation to the best of your ability. And it takes about, I think when we would play it, it would take like 2 days, and so it'd be like maybe two 6 to 7 hour sessions,
Hmm.
you know. And so you got to get 7 people that are willing to show up on a Saturday and a Sunday for seven
Yeah.
hours
I feel
and
like
play
I'm
a
not
war
going to be
game.
there till me and my buddies' kids are old enough to be out of the house. Because I remember back in college, we'd be like, "Hey, let's play Axis and Allies all night." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But like once you got all that schedule stuff, it gets hard, and people cancel at the last minute. And like you say, I think Alexander Macris talks about like when you join a campaign, it should be like an intramural sport where it's like you got to be there for your team, and
yeah.
not everybody can do that right now.
Well, that's why Sundays I play Plato Empire computer game. It's a Star Trek game. It's like a game of Risk with spaceships, and you go around shooting each other, and you're trying to move armies. But
Is
all
that going
that,
to be at
it's
Arnecon as well?
yeah, and it's
Who was
real
at the last
time.
one?
Yeah, it was there last time. It's real time in terms of it's one to one time, not really real time, but it is sort of a one to one time because you're doing it on a computer.
Ew.
Well, you can do one to one time if you're on a computer, but the minute you step away, you're not in one to one time. I mean, that's people have wanted to do like these campaign games, and the only people that can really do them, even on computers, are the chronics. Like I can't. There were times when I spent, God, 8 hours a day on a computer playing video games. I was just a chronic
So
addict,
I
and
found I found that old article last time that you wrote about discovering Plato. It's oh, I forget the
oh,
magazine it
it's
was
an
in.
irregular
Irregular.
magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which was really
yeah.
cool. Just because I mean you were at the cutting
I
edge. I
was
don't know if
like
anybody played
13.
video games before you did.
Yeah, I was 13. It was probably 75 or 76, something like that, when I discovered it. But no, but there, that kind of fulfills a part of that for me. So like, I can have a 4 hour block of really intense team play where we're trying to maneuver and we're trying to do trick things, like you are trying to make a feint so they think you're going to go for this planet, but somebody breaks off and does something, and the other guys are just screening, and they're like, or you fly up to a planet and you start bombing it and you just sacrifice your ship bombing it and you die, and you have to respawn at the beginning point again, like all that kind of stuff that makes for a fun game. Um, but I think people have been trying to do these kind of things, like what the brosters want to do, or trying to do, have been trying to do that stuff for a really long time. If you look around, there are a lot of people that have done those kinds of things. Like if you can find stuff about um, the campaign I talked about in England, I think it was in England, was the the Hyboria game.
Oh,
You know, that was in the 60s. And
I
it was
have the
done,
book
I think,
upstairs. What is it?
yeah, it was in the 60s, I think. You know, and
Somebody in the
Arneson was,
chat, if you know the Hyboria campaign, type it in. Tony Bath, thank you.
yeah, it was Tony
Tony
Bath.
Bath's Ancient Wargaming.
Yeah.
It's a blue book. It's got
And he
X's
was
and G's on the
introducing
cover.
personages. Like, have you ever played Divine Right? That's another, it's a
I've
board
not.
game, but Divine Right has, it tries to scale. And so it does things like each of you is a king, but you also get a profile card. And the profile card kind of describes who you are, you know, and you
Mhm.
get bonuses and whatever. And you draw those for the non-player character kingdoms if you don't have all the players in the game. And then you also have these things where you draw cards and you can activate these units of like mercenaries that come join you, and they all have different powers. And it's, you know, it's doing the same sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. If only some people could stop, you know, misappropriating the name Brownstein, I'd be a happy guy.
So just the brown is the part that bugs you.
The fact that
The Stein is up for grabs.
the claim to understand to understand what you are doing, like the claim to understand that what you're doing is not truly a Braunstein for a lot of reasons, and also the claim of sort of appropriating something that really does belong to David Wesely, and he should be honored for that. And so if you look at the Blackmore bunch, you know, Dwayne Jenkins creates a Brownstein-like game set in the Wild West. It's called Brownstone.
How
Dave
is that
Arneson,
not appropriation?
different name. It's like we're saying, and he does it. He referees it differently.
Yeah, but could
It
you
is a
say that
different game.
Brownstone is a Braunstein? Or would you have to say a
It is a
Brownstein
kind.
like?
It's a kind of Brown. It's Brownstein-like or a kind of Brownstein. Yeah.
Because I don't want the takeaway to be that the BroSR is not honoring David Wesely, because we hold that man in very high regard. We see not only what he did, but also what you did to share what he did as lighting the way towards this more immersive, well, not immersive. Some people don't like that word, but engaging, let's say
Right.
engaging style of play that whether it was all the rage or whether it got suppressed or for whatever reason, I didn't get it until I started playing with those guys. And I don't know what groups outside of the BroSR are doing the kind of things that you talk about. And I don't know why that is even.
Well, I mean, like, I think Macris probably does stuff like that for starters, you know, from what I've heard about his designs. You just
Like, how
start
many
talking to
people ask
that,
you questions about Braunsteins that you don't have block?
that I don't have a beef with?
Yeah.
The people that don't run around saying that they're running Brownsteins and not acknowledging that they're using a game format they don't understand that is the name of the game.
So if we said we are trying to run Brownsteins to the best of our knowledge,
we're doing a Brownstein variant.
Because until you came on my show and started pointing out the nuances, how is anybody supposed to get that? All the rules are still on your Zoom, right? With Wesely, like the rules have not been.
Look. I mean, I was talking about it earlier. What kind of idiot do you have to be like, we're going to play Monopoly, but I like calling my Monopoly Brownstein.
Well, but you can play. You know, they have Star Wars Monopoly,
right? Well, that's corporate crap. That's not the same thing, you know. But is it Star Wars? Is it a Star Wars game? Does it feel like you're playing like a Star Wars combat game or a Star Wars?
I'm moving my X-wing to Coruscant. I don't know.
Yeah. Is it Boardwalk or is it, what do they call it now? Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, just show some respect. It just doesn't seem like I'm not seeing the respect, you know. And I
guess
so as long as I don't see, as long
right?
as I don't see the respect, then I'm just going to keep calling it out and saying that people are acting like jackasses, you know. But if it was like, we love it and we want to play something like it, so we're going to call it, you know, BroSR Stein, I'd be like,
well, okay. A lot of people are doing that. How about okay? Let me do a hypothetical.
See, I don't see that. I just see people
what if they
around.
have respect for Wesely, but they still act like a jackass to you?
I am really good at trolling, and I will troll back full force. But mostly, I just block people now. You know.
Yeah.
I had so many people, like, I would go and look, like, people would come in and make some jackass comment to me on Twitter today. So I'd look at their profile and be like, oh, they're not following me Oh, they've got like 200 followers or 1,000 followers. Let's block them. I don't, whatever. Um, you know, I don't care. Like, there's all these people, like all the influencers are like, oh, I got to have as many people following me as possible. And I'm like, no, if you're being a jackass, I'll just get rid of you. I don't care. You know,
Okay.
It's just simpler. But no, you don't come in, you don't come charging in and attack me for anything. You're polite. I refriended you because I was like, I like his show. I liked chatting
thanks,
with
man.
him
I appreciate
before,
that. I don't have,
No, and I loved
don't
your
have
review
this,
of the book. I thought it was hilarious.
I don't have the standing to come at anybody that's been doing this way longer than me. I'm here to learn.
Right.
But I have learned a lot from Jeff Rowe. Like, he's my DM, he's my friend, and I have had experiences with that man in these games that I would never
Crafty
have had.
Matt. No, you got to read that one. No, Griff, it's not about respect. It's that you are not seeing the money. I'm going to block him when I get off this show.
I think he's already blocked. Okay, well, no, but let's address that though, because that is one of I'm not trying to get you gotcha questions, but I do want to give you the
No,
chance.
you can
to
though. I'm fine with it.
I want to give you the chance to address it. Some people are saying, or maybe saying, or maybe feeling that the reason why you are clutching the term Braunstein
is for ownership.
Is because you've got a product coming out soon and you don't want to share that. You don't want the spotlight going anywhere else. So how would you react to someone who accuses you of that?
Well, it's my gut reaction when I see people misappropriating the term Brownstein is a gut reaction. And it just is something that offends me because I know what David Wesely did so closely. And I feel offended by that. Okay. And I know that you're not best friends with Wesely. You're not.
No, I've never spoken with him, and I'd love to meet him. I'd love to have him on my show if he
wants. John Peterson wrote about Brownstein and playing at the World. He has like maybe this much on it, and he's got a book this thick, and there's this much space on a page about it. Okay.
And I think Brownstein stuff is the secret sauce, right?
When I made Secrets of Blackmore, I insisted on putting a huge, I think it's 25 minutes of Brownstein, and then there's at least another 10 or 13 minutes of Brownstone, right? Because I felt that those were really important. I also felt those people were the people that were ignored by all the historians and that needed to get brought into the limelight, And ever since I released the movie, suddenly I released that movie and everybody wants to, I'm seeing all these people interviewing Wesely and Wesley's getting into the limelight. And it's like, well, yeah, good, good for you, right? And so like that sort of stuff is respectful of Wesely. They're like, you did this thing. It's really cool. Tell me about it, right? And so...
Can you point to a specific instance that you saw somebody in the Broasar disrespecting Wesely with the way they used it? Or is it based on the knowledge?
There's a general tone of ownership of the Brownstein name within the group that I've seen, that I saw.
Tone of ownership, okay.
And, I can read tone into writing, I'm not an idiot. I speak multiple languages. I can figure it out.
Do you think Wesely would like me? Do you think he'd ever want to come on this show?
Oh, I'd get you Wesely if you wanted to talk to Wesely.
If he wants to talk,
he would love to.
If he's okay with me, I don't even know.
He's not very talkative.
Is he aware of all of this? All the maelstrom in a teacup that's been going on Twitter today, or is he like?
Yeah, I think that there's now been a lot of discussion that he really needs to trademark the name. And that's another thing, people who think they are lawyers get on the internet and they LARP the lawyer stuff. So I was using an example in the Twitter talk of something, and people were like, oh, you're accusing me that you're going to file a lawsuit against me. And it's like, I don't own the Brownstein name. I'm not the creator.
I feel like that wasn't your heat. I feel like that was from the Dave guy that came on earlier. Dave Con.
Dave Con guy. Well, he's pissed off.
People got you confused because you're both running a con, right? And so I think people got you confused.
He and I had a little tussle over that. But now we get along great. If I can get the money together, I'll go up to Dave Con. Yeah, but I understand his frustration. But there is when you look at stuff having to do with IP, it goes deeper than what people think, and there are sort of situations where somebody can claim something based on historical usage,
like squatters' rights kind of thing.
Yeah, well, creators' rights, And so, when Wesely, I use the example of when the people came up with, you've got the game there. You showed it to me earlier. the
Oh,
battle,
yeah.
the Barons of Braunstein.
Where did I put it? I do have it here. Just give us a second.
Yeah.
Oh, it's right here.
God, I hope people are enjoying the show because I feel like I just turned into a professor. So Barons of Braunstein
I'm
was
so
being
interested.
produced by this group of people. I think it's a husband and wife team or something like that.
Yeah, they got
were
a little character sheet in
they
there.
had played a Brownstein. Like I played a Brownstein before I knew what a Brownstein was up in Boulder, Colorado in like maybe 93 or 94. And there were people running Brownsteins. They didn't call them Brownsteins games. They just called them live action role playing games. But it was a Brownstein. You showed up, you were given a character, you played for
Did they
8
give
hours.
Wesely credit, or were they
No,
appropriate?
but they weren't publishing. They didn't
Well,
publish.
nobody in the BroSR is publishing.
Right. Okay. Fine.
They're just running games.
Okay. But yeah, we'll go into that later.
Okay.
So when Wesely got wind of these people publishing these things, and if you hold it up again, it says Barons of Braunstein. You don't need to hold it up; it just says Barons.
Yeah, there's a copyright at the very beginning too.
Right, and does it say anything about licensing?
It says copyright 2014 by James and Robin George, Brownstein in the Middle Ages, copyright 2008 by David A. Wesely, electronic edition. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means without express written permission from the authors, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles and reviews. Please refer all pertinent questions to the publisher, Printing United States of America, Old House Rules, third printing, licensed by David A. Wesely and Discovery Games.
There you go. That's his game company, is Discovery Games.
And
then we never got to finish the whole thing about the history. I was saying, like, they were working through working on ColecoVision and publishing games.
Yeah.
And you were asking about why you didn't publish the game, and it's like they published a game which was incredibly popular according to like reviews. It was everywhere. The Dragon magazine had nothing but praise for Source of the Nile. They had articles on it. You'd see references to it everywhere in the magazines. It was like the thing to own. Mm-hmm. But their company didn't sell that many copies. It was like, it was not a huge, it wasn't actually a huge hit. People just like to talk about it, kind of like a lot of the young kids talk about certain other games that are very popular right now. They'll talk about it like they do it, but they don't actually buy the books. And so the company isn't making as much money as they wish they were.
The only game I played on ColecoVision was the Smurfs game. You remember that one? It's like a side-scrolling.
I had a Smurfs game. I remember like Frogger and Zaxxon and things like that. Anyway, so they figured out pretty quick that you're not going to make a living publishing games, right? And
well, and I do want to point out in this that David does have an article at the very last page. This is the 2008 part where he goes into detail on how he came up with the term for the place. Why the river rocks are brown because of the iron content and the Rhine Valley.
Yeah, he has a whole history that he wrote up for it.
Braunwasser.
Yeah, the Braunwasser. Anyway, so that's what happened with that game was that he got wind of these people publishing a game using the name Brownstein. So then he talked to his lawyer, who happened to be one of his gaming buddies, who's the same gaming buddy that originally represented Dave Arneson against TSR, Ken Shepro.
There's a connection.
There's a lot of connections there. Like Ken Shepro's hilarious because what they did was they were holding Gen Con at the hotel there where they hold Gen Con, right? Back in the 70s. So Dave and Shepro go to TSR headquarters, wherever that was at that time. And they walk in and Shepro says, "My name is Ken Shepro. I'm a lawyer. This is Dave Arneson. He's my client. He's a stockholder in this company. We want to see all the financial records." So they go in and they start Xeroxing off all the financial records for TSR.
They were Braunsteining the company.
Yeah. And they did it.
Isn't that what Arneson did in the first Banania? Didn't he like show a bunch of credentials and just
right? Well, he was a lawyer and he was a stockholder, but they railroaded the employees into being like, okay, because they were just underlings. Like they were the people that don't get to go to the convention, right? Everybody special and important was at the Grand playing war games. Well, they're trying to get a hold of Gary and company, and they can't. So Shepro and Arneson are just like Xeroxing off file after file after file and report until they run out of paper on the Xerox. There's no more Xerox machine paper anywhere in the building. And then they are notified, we just got a call from Gary. You're not allowed to be here. You're going to have to leave, sir. And they're like, okay, we're going to leave now. So they leave with all these documents.
Just reams.
Yeah. And they go back to the hotel at the convention because they're at the convention too.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and they meet Wesely. Wesely will say like, yeah, I was in the hotel room, and they come in, you know, and they're like, yeah, we were just at the TSR Xeroxing off all the financial records so that we have evidence for this trial that we're going to be going through with. So Shepro is pretty well versed in this kind of IP stuff, you know. And when he saw the Barons of Braunstein, he was like, well, you don't really need you have a claim to that because of previous use. And so you can sue them for using your game name. Like if it was the Brownstein golf course, you know, or Brownstein magazine, be a different thing. But it was a game. And so Shepro was like, we can go take them apart, like atom by atom. I'm ready, you know, I'm ready to go. And I called Wesely, and I was like, what's going on? And he's like, well, we got this thing going on. And I was like, well, why don't you just have them license it? It'll save you a lot of hassle, right? And he was like, yeah, that's kind of what I've been wanting to do, you know. I'm like, yeah, just have them license it for like, you know, what do you want? He's like, I don't really want a lot. I just want to make sure that nobody imposes on my ownership of my game, right? You know.
So that's also playing into the protection that you and Dave Kahn feel, is knowing that he has those feelings that he doesn't want somebody imposing on the ownership of his game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of stuff that, because of your perspectives, things you've seen and things you understand, that maybe you internalize, and it can be easy to forget that not everybody has access, not everybody has the perspective.
Right.
You know?
So, you know, if you just say like, what are you doing? And it's like, we're doing, you know, I don't know, whatever Stein. People will be like, oh, it's a Stein. Must be a variant, right?
I would love for it to still show respect to Wesely without stealing his name. Like if
you use his name and you're not playing the exact same game that he's going to publish with me writing it, you're stealing his name.
Right.
You know?
But so here's another question that comes up, and I want to give you a chance to address the commoditization of terms, right? Like everyone calls every brand of bandages Band-Aids now. Everyone calls flying discs.
That's like a public domain thing, yeah.
Yeah. Is that...
But Band-Aid is like already, you know, Band-Aid doesn't care because that just means that when people go in the store, they're going to buy Band-Aids, right?
So how is it different with this product you've got coming on? If you've got all these people excited and saying Braunstein, how is that?
Because if it floats out if it floats out into a public domain status as a word before Wesely has a chance to really cement ownership, it would make it a lot harder for him to claim it as his own thing, even though there is an established like historical legal precedent in place for it being
so there's
his.
A concern there.
There is a concern there too, you know, like, and do you think that there might be a jackass that's even more of a jackass that would want to do something like maybe try to trademark the name for themselves before Wesely does, or, you know?
I mean, after today,
I've been watching that.
There's probably people that are thinking it would be funny, right?
Yeah, I know. Do you know about the guy that's taking certain websites for really big game companies and just misspelling the name and has like a bunch of domains that are just adjacent to.
Is he hoping that he can sell it back to them? That they'll like the big.
No, he's using it to troll them. As far as I can tell, he's just trolling them. Like if you mistype a wizard name, you'll end up on a site, and this guy's like got a whole site where he just, you know, it's just like it's not even a fake site. It's just like he's just like, yeah, I grabbed the domain that's like one letter off from your name.
Yeah, he probably paid $5 for it for the year.
Yeah, and he's got a bunch of friends, and they're all like web designers, and they're just laughing it up.
So trolls are gonna troll.
Trolls are gonna, but that's really fun trolling, you know. I think. I mean, it's not a person, you know, like the big game company is not a person, you know, a corporation. Yeah. Much as legally. I think it was like the Peabody Coal Company, or maybe it was the Illinois Central back in like the late 1800s or 1920s that got the status, achieved status of personhood for for corporations because they had really good lawyers. I mean, that's been,
How careful do you have to be with publishing your stuff as far as like trademarks and copyrights and boilerplate stuff you put in the front?
we put well, we originally used the OGL just because we wanted to be safe, and
Everyone
Dan
did,
felt
right?
safer. Yeah, now that we know more about it, we will never use the OGL again.
Well, and so like the stuff you're talking about way I feel like OGL started with like 3.5, something like that, right?
Well, they claim the ownership of like all these things that, and they can backdate it to ownership of all of the D&D products. They bought everything from TSR.
It's
But you
confusing. They got
can't.
the SRD, they got the OGL, they got Creative Commons. I'm like, I don't even know how to.
I mean, people got all stinky with me on oh, we've been playing Brownsteins and discussing them since July of 2021. My movie came out, I think, in 2019. So there you go. Just call it something else, Jeffro.
Jeffrostein.
Jeffy Stein. And then I don't care. I don't think you're an ass. That's an opinion. I'm not saying you are one. But I would have, I just hold that, I hold on to that. It's my buddy David Wesely, and it's his property as far as I'm concerned. And so if you want to show respect, you will show respect by not misappropriating that. But you can honor it by doing what Arneson did, And besides, you guys you're doing early Blackmore. You're not doing Brownstein. You're doing what Arneson was like, using different scales of play, like domain play, individual play, like kind of like domain being the rulers of the domain.
So
then
what are you
leaders of
familiar
armies
with
and navies,
as far as
and
what
then,
we've done? Like, have you watched my recaps of it, or are you reading the blogs, or how are you getting your information about how the bros are doing it?
I just talking to people, and what they say they're doing, and so based on that, I'm just like, well, you're not doing I know what you want to do, and I know that what you're doing is a Blackmore format.
Because they may not be doing a good job of explaining to you what's really going on.
But I like what you have told me that you're not doing a Brownstein.
Okay.
Right?
Well, again,
so
you got to take what I say with a grain of salt.
Right. But if you're not doing the, I don't know. It's like, why call your risk game, Brownstein? It's like, it's a risk game. But it's like, I think that what you guys are doing is really a Blackmore, an early Blackmore format, which is a hybridization of Brownstein, wargaming, and D&D. Okay, and D&D.
How long did Blackmore go like
faction.
that? Would you reckon before it was full on D&D? Like how long? The stuff
Arneson,
we're playing with, the proto stuff.
At least 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
I don't know. You'd have to look at those write-ups, and you can probably infer a lot from those. There's a write-up in the back of the book, which I thought I put in there because I just thought it was really interesting, because it's like Dave kind of looking back at his campaign.
I love this picture, by the way.
The Myth and Mythos. Yeah, that's my favorite Arneson picture. He just looks like such a sweet kid, right?
Yeah.
I love, Dave Arneson is a really interesting person. I don't know. But
so page 94 for those of you playing the home game, Myth and Mythos.
Yeah, the Myth and Mythos. So he talks about, I think this was written later, and he's looking back and he's talking about the different stages of the world that he's been running. And so there was like, he talks about the outdoor survival map game, and which there's a little side note. It says also the scene of fighting in John Snyder's space game, which is we're going to publish Snyder's space game hopefully sometime in the next 6 months.
I do want to talk about some of that. Like
it's going to be like stepping back into 1970 and playing what would have been Traveler that never got published.
Because Star Probe was the first one, right? And it wasn't an RPG; it was just straight up space war game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Star Empires was next.
Yeah, that was like the big battle game. Like one is the exploration game where you find the other players' domains and you're kind of like establishing your realms.
Is there anywhere to get that stuff now, or do you just got to go to eBay and pay an arm and a leg for the
eBay and an arm and a leg?
Huh. But he had a third one that he was going to come out with.
Yeah, originally it was going to be called Star Master. So it'd be Star Probe, Star Empire, and Star Master.
Yeah.
We're probably going to call it the Star Empire's RPG just to give it a more clear, like it's going to say more like
Are
the
you
stars.
just going to be publishing the new stuff, or are you going to try and rope in all three?
Well, it's all old stuff, like the
Yeah,
draft
I mean,
we
like
got.
stuff that we haven't seen.
Right. The stuff you haven't seen probably comes from about 84. And so it's still pretty old. And then we're going to look at doing and also doing the other stuff. There was a lot of really bad business dealings back then too, where it's like trying to claim ownership for things is really hard. And
I got my hands on a box set of Universe, which was the SPI game.
I had that.
And then TSR bought them and then just kind of killed it, right?
See, that's the other thing is TSR. Well, TSR didn't have the resources to publish all that stuff anymore.
And then they had the two guys working on Star Frontiers, and then they just kind of yanked them off it and put other people in charge. And yeah.
I mean, there was a lot. Well, Star Frontiers is kind of like, I don't know. There was a lot of weird stuff going on at TSR.
That's why I'm interested in all those other stuff.
Yeah.
There is a question from the chat to ask you about Ben Robbins, who's been talking about Braunstein since 2005 at Lame Mage and selling his own Braunstein. I wasn't aware of this Ben Robbins.
I wasn't aware of it either. Now that I know,
not on your radar?
I will make sure the lawyers know.
Check that out. Okay.
Not
Thanks,
my
Crafty,
lawyers.
for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll need
was that worth unblocking him?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, bro.
Right. I mean, if he's selling it under the name Brownstein, maybe it's like time to. I mean, it's hard, like you don't want to be a jerk.
Are we beating a dead horse? Have we gotten out all the stuff you wanted to say about Braunstein type play, or is there any nuance of it?
No, that's pretty much it. But okay. I did want to talk about this. Well, like this thing in the book that I was talking about.
Yes,
it's really interesting because Arneson goes through all these different stages, and so you really get an idea of like the different ways he might have been running his campaign, and like when he talks about the high-tech intergalactic traveling zoo, and then he's like they send out groups to scout out the locals and determine, like, report on the city of the Temple of the Frog, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the Temple of the Frog isn't something that Dave created fully. He had one of his players created that character, and so they had players that would, that was the kind of like, they would try not to metagame. And so like if you were a bad guy, but you showed up to play and there wasn't anything for you to do as your bad guy, you could play like a dwarf or an oak and orc or whatever in the party and be a party member and go fight things in the dungeon, right?
Yeah.
But then when you went back to doing your higher level thing of being the bad guy, you would go off and do that, So that kind of play, it all come, and it's not just Arneson and Wesely doing that in the Blackmore Bunch. Like that is really like what you're looking at is very much the zeitgeist of the 60s, 70s wargaming, where they wanted to take it to a higher level of, we're not just going to set up our army men and have a battle.
There's so much good stuff in this book, you guys. I did not have a chance to cover it all in my video. There is one section where he talks about like the forces that the Barons had, but he had a few like warlords just in case other people showed up, right? Mm-hmm. Like he had a couple forces set aside, like, okay, well, it depends on how many people show up, how many bad guys we're going to get. I thought that was fascinating. The section that had me like pointing, like the meme of Leo DiCaprio pointing at the TV, was when you talked about how they would have some of their warlords would go down into the Lake Geneva territory, and so they would call them up and be like, hey, we got like, these are the forces, can you put some of your guys in charge of our men that are coming down to raid you? And
they tried to do it a lot of times. The players for your team that were part of that group would like sort of fudge it and not really play as hard as they could. So they didn't want to like wipe out their friends, and so they did a lot of stuff like that where it was like the idea was a great idea, but it just wasn't really
well. And that reminded me of the whole like cross table play stuff that was going on back when I first got interested in the BroSR, where they would be sending forces into completely other campaigns, sometimes with different rule sets even. But one of the cool things that I don't think I talked about in the video was when he first started running Blackmore, it was almost like an isekai, where he's like, all right, my plane has gone down in the woods and you guys got to find me.
Yeah.
Right. And they played themselves going to find Arneson and then wound up in this fantasy world.
They called each other by their names when they played most of the time. You know, like people played themselves. Like Pete Gaylord was the Wizard of the Wood, but they called him Peter, you know.
Yeah. And this picture of like them saying, you know, here's what I would have brought to come find you. So you're like at a castle with spears and arrows, and this guy's got a 6.
Yeah, there's a giant in the castle that's like shooting like a big crossbow at you that's shooting like spear-like things.
And they've got
handguns and
backpacks, and it looks like a guitar. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. Trying to think. No, I think we've pretty much covered it all, most of what it is. I mean, it's all this drama over this stuff, you know. My thing is just like, if you are nicer, people might talk to you more.
Well, I mean, thanks for coming on and being able and willing to share your perspective.
I'm always glad to call brosters jackasses, you know. Like, anytime you need somebody to come on and be like, brosters suck. Brosters suck. You're all idiots.
Did you just say people need to be nicer, and then you guys all suck out of the very same sentence?
Yeah, you brosters love a good kicking. Come on.
What was I saying? What was I saying before you just hypocrited like that? I can't remember what it was.
I know. I just blew it right out of your head.
So we be nice to you, but you be mean to us. I got it.
I might, you know, we might come to some sort of truce. We might actually get along. So some of you guys are coming to Arnecon?
I hope to. I missed the last one, and I was just kicking myself. I hope other people will be willing to come.
It's really going to be fun.
Throw bones together and call each other jackasses and have a great time.
I'm just going to be out back smoking and drinking scotch. Like, just come out and sip some scotch. You know?
So maybe come out, let him kill your character, and then he'll unblock you.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, though. Like, you know, if you really want to be friends with me, are any of you guys brave enough to play like old video games? Come play Empire with me.
I'd love to play.
I will kick your ass, but you'll learn.
I'm sure you will. You got the muscle memory on that one.
Yeah.
So Arnecon's coming up.
I'm reading. I got to read the comments.
Okay.
I think everybody's calling each other names now.
Yeah. We were too nice to each other. They had to the chat turned on itself.
What's broser mean? Somebody asked that in the chat. What does broser mean?
Oh. Are you interested in that?
I don't know what it means.
You don't know what it means? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it is, I think it's a pun on the OSR,
right.
Where it was, you know, I'm not really sure the exact origin of the term. I know that when here's what I do understand.
I always thought it was something like ballless rogues OSR or something like that.
I think you're right. It's probably
low T OSR gamers.
So it started with
I'm trying to provoke you and you're not playing along.
I'm sorry. It's really hard to stay mad at me.
What does broser stand for? Brazilian OSR. It
started with bullying. It started with a guy named Macris, and he was bullying a guy named Jeffro online and said, if you were a real man, you would play AD&D, 1E, all the rules, even the ones that don't make sense, especially the ones that nobody wanted to play. And then there was a bunch of bodybuilder memes and wrestling memes that came along with that. And so Jeffro was like, fine, I'll do it. And he started the Trilopulus campaign. And and this is funny. I've talked to Rick Stump. He was the first person that ever came on my show. My show is a year old this week, and my first episode was September 6th, and Rick Stump came on. Wow. And he said that he has an email where he told Jeffro to play AD&D First Edition, and Jeffro said it can't be done. So that's pretty funny if you want like a clippable moment. But anyway, Macris says you got to do it if you want my respect. And so Jeffro tried it, and that's where the one-to-one thing came out. And that's where a lot of these, the first thing they committed to was rules as written, trying their best. And then when they started playing with one-to-one time and all of the 1E rules, it produced a very different experience to what they were used to. Right. And so they got excited about it and they started saying, hey, this is really awesome. This is the, you know, what you got to do. This is awesome. And then they got a lot of pushback from people that were used to conventional play 5e or whatever, saying you guys are stupid, you know what you're talking about. And they're like, no, if you follow these rules, this is the real way to play D&D. And that's what I think they really stepped on people's air hose when they said,
see, that's what I saw, and I was like, oh, come on, guys, like you can play however you want, you know, like really. You know?
Yeah, but by the same token, we're here talking because you're saying you guys aren't playing Braunstein the real way, right? So
well, I think that there's a difference
not?
in. I just think it has to do with the ownership of the name and being respectful of David Wesely, and you know, and you aren't playing a Brownstein, you're playing like a Blackmore format. So just call it that. Like, I'm not going to be offended if you say we're using like Dave Arneson's early Blackmore format, which is a mixed, you know, and then somebody says, what is that? Well, it's a mixed scale game. It's got domain, it's got military level, it's got individual level. I'm not going to be offended with you doing that. I don't even think the DaveCon guy, Victor, I think, or no, it's is it Victor? I think it's Victor. Yeah, Vic. I think he wouldn't be offended by that either. You know, there is just a sense of appropriation that seems pervasive.
Got it.
And well, I've tried to explain it to some people, like, you aren't doing the right thing. You're basically appropriating the name and then applying something else to it, and I think that's really wrong. I can't do anything to stop you from doing that, but I think that you could show more taste and respect by just doing everything I talked about earlier in the show.
Right.
That's
and
it.
I mean, I would say that,
and then I'll follow a bunch of you back.
People that don't have the perspective and the insight that you do, I don't think that they meant to do it wrong. I think they're trying to reverse engineer something that's not out there yet, and they're doing their best. And I don't think anyone's really, I think everybody involved, both his friends and the people that are trying to play this way, respect the heck out of Mr. Wesely. I have not heard a single person say a bad thing about him.
The stuff you're trying to do is really hard because, and I talk about it in, I don't know if I talked about it in Tonnesborg product pitch. I didn't talk about it in Tonnesborg. I'm going to talk about it more in another book I'm writing. But it's really hard to do the domain stuff because all you have to do is assassinate the leader of the domain and everything changes and that player's out of the game. You know?
Yeah.
And like I remember years ago, I tell this story a lot because it's so memorable. We were playing Empire of the Petal Throne, but we didn't like the combat system, so we'd adapted the melee and wizard rules to it.
Okay.
And then when In the Labyrinth was published, we shifted over from Tecumel over to the Sidri world, but we used the Empire of the Petal Throne setting in Sidri. But I wanted to do more, you know, because we were just doing the same thing over and over. It was like what you're talking about with like the 5e players. It's like,
yeah,
we're just going to the dungeon. I want to do more development.
And again, if you guys are into 5e that are watching this, I'm not trying to yuck your yum. I'm just speaking about my own personal experience. I'm not saying
want to raise the bar.
It's not the right kind of way to have fun. I'm just saying, like, I don't enjoy it as much as what I've been doing since I've been playing with this deep magic, these older principles. Even imperfectly, I'm still having way more of a charge out of it than I did with 5e. That's not to say you guys aren't.
Yeah, we don't want to.
Yeah.
Everybody's tired of the additional worship. It's meaningless. So I got together with my dungeon master and I was like, look, I want to do more. And I explained to him, I want to do something where I'm going to develop this character and I want to get involved in like the political intrigue in this world. You know, like I want to start out maybe as a spy, but maybe I can get powerful enough that I can become a noble and start to have an impact. I want to be somebody, right?
Yeah.
I don't care about leveling up. I care about my power that I can leverage through my allies and stuff like that.
You want to leave your thumbprint on the game world.
Yeah, and I do that with every time I was in one world and I founded a city in the game and I was only like second level when I started building the city. And the DM was just like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm building a city. Leave me alone.
That's right.
It's just one building. Soon it will be an empire. But so we did all this work, developed this character. I even described the character in an old interplay letter to an old interplay magazine that has terrible like teenager grammar in it, but I wrote them a letter and they published it. Where I talked about all the things I talk about now, which is like the role playing isn't in the rules. I was like, if you want to be your character, play your character as your character. You won't find that crap in the rules, you know?
Yeah.
And I was saying that stuff when I was like 18, you know? But so like all these arguments go back 30 years, 40 years, you know? So we went on this mission and I was hiring the rest of the players, the party, to be I was the patron. I'd gotten all this money from my my patron. I hired the party, and I had this map to lead us into this deep into this dungeon, and we were going to go raid this place, and we needed to retrieve something for my patron, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we get to this one place, and there's a big bridge over a chasm, and there's a door opens on the other side, and there's all these skeletons, and so we're trying to take them out, but arrows only do half damage in that particular game system. So we're like, we just got to like rush them. So I'm like behind the front ranks, shooting my bow, trying to help out, and I catch an arrow, and the skeleton rolled a critical hit and did double damage, which was enough to knock me down. And then I like it was like the sequence of like, it gets a good roll to hit, it gets a good damage roll, it's enough to knock me down. I fail my dexterity roll and pitch off the bridge into the abyss. Okay,
one arrow.
Right, but this is like this is the character that I built that is going to launch my whole like more than just RPGing, you know.
Yep.
Like the full on, like the full living world experience, and it died on the first adventure, and so that's
instant.
That's the problem you have when you try to run these kind of games, is that
Yeah.
if you actually are playing by the dice, it's not going to go according to.
Well, but you have to have that ambition. You're like, okay, well, my next character is really going to do
it. Yeah. Right? I think that it wasn't long after that the game group collapsed. I think our DM moved out of town, so it's just like.
Another reason that you may want to consider unblocking Crafty Matt, not just because he pointed out that Ben Robinson guy, he is running. I don't know if they're finished yet. I'm going to try and get him on the channel. He is running a Brotech, a Battletech-Stein, if you will, using the rules for Battletech to have these high-level players in the Game of Thrones kind of thing between the Inner Sphere. And so I'm excited to bring that to everybody.
That's great.
See what they think.
Like, if people are able to do it, do it. I don't care. Just don't call it a Brownstein.
Right on.
Like, how do I have to, like, just don't call it a Brownstein, please?
That's why we named it. We don't call it a Brownstein. So what's next?
I was going to say, I was just going to say, what else was I going to say? I lost it. It was a good thought, too.
I've done that a couple times this whole conversation.
Yeah, it's getting later. No, that was pretty much it. You know, I don't want to like grind on it too much. You know,
I think we understand each other. I think we understand.
Yeah, I think so.
And I was going to say, I hope Vic watches this, and I hope that he feels like his perspective is represented well. Because I don't know if he got out over his skis with the
I know what I was going to say
thing, but I think everyone gets out over their skis on Twitter. So hopefully there's some grace for him in there too. Go ahead.
No, when we publish stuff like Crafty Matt's like, oh, he doesn't want his money threatened. Like, you see these piles of gold behind me. Like, my shoes, I bought them on Amazon. This shirt, I got at a thrift store. Like,
right. We're all gamers.
We're all gamers. We're not being like, if you want to make a lot of money in gaming, I will tell you right now, you have to move by yourself at least 10,000 units.
Well, no, I've heard there is a secret. If you want to make a small fortune in gaming, you have to start with a large one, right?
Or that. No, I think if you want to lose a lot of money in gaming, you have to start with a large fund. Yeah, if I wanted to make money, I would just, like, my sister runs antique stores. I'd just start an antique store. You know, I've often fantasized about having like a store that's just like the man store, and I just have like all the male hobbies in one store.
Do you read Bradford Walker's blog?
No.
He's got a very interesting series about the clubhouse and how hobby gaming, like how it's changed by trying to become commercial, but what it could be if we just let go of the commercial side of it and said, what if we had like, you know, like those old British, you know, dining clubs where like after the meal they'd all smoke their pipes and play war games and read books and stuff.
Right. You could have like that, and you just have to sit around and play.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
So Arnecon is next, October 4, and then what irons do you have in the fire after that?
Well, we got a lot of games. Like, we have a wall, and we've got like 20 different games pinned to the wall, like kind of planned for the coming times, and so we sort of had to, for various reasons, we bumped my Spiral Keep, my Terror Spiral Keep book in favor of doing this one.
Okay.
So Terror of Spiral Keep is coming up. That's really just going to be my take on the fact that horror is like a core element of original D&D, and
Yeah.
people should put horror back.
Well,
I mean, it's sort of funny, like all these people that are like, you don't want to trigger your players and hurt them. And it's like, no. When we were kids, the whole idea was to freak out the players. It's like,
yeah.
I open the door. What do you see? You see somebody hanging out upside down. They're still alive, but there are maggots coming out of their eyes, and all your friends are like, ugh.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
that's what teenagers do, right?
It's fascinating you bring that up, because I feel like every year I want to do some like Halloween one shots, but like there's so
I want
much.
to do Halloween one shots every time I run a dungeon, though. Like,
Yeah, I want to play
and
one
I
with
do.
you.
Oh, you should. Yeah.
But what is the difference between a horror one shot and normal D&D? Because you've got, I mean, it's a fine line, right? Like everything is creepy and scary in D&D if you think about it in a certain way.
Yeah,
Like
but the
even the
core of
lowest
it,
level skeleton, it's
the original D&D is like Blackmoor is based on Gothic horror and some fantasy things, but the main monsters, like from literature, like orcs, and Balrogs. A lot of the main monsters that are in original Blackmoor and then get ported into D&D, like, what the hell is a vampire doing in D&D? Like, it's kind of weird and incongruous. Well, Dwayne Jenkins wanted to play a vampire.
Yeah, he wanted to play one, not the bad guy, but like his main character.
Yeah, his main character was a vampire, and so you end up with vampires everywhere. There's the whole thing with the Hobbit vampires. They have to go figure out what's making Hobbit vampires. Which is both ridiculous and terrifying.
Little holes in their butt in the morning.
Yeah, like around your ankle. Like, something's been draining my body of blood from my knee.
Ankle biters.
Yeah, or butt biters. You're right. I guess the height would be more like a butt biter. But anyway, we digress. So we have that one. David McGarry is working with us, and we try to stay really tight with all the people that we really like.
Yeah,
like we met through the making the movie that are now our friends. And David McGarry is working with us, and he was the original editor on Mutant, which was supposed to have been published by TSR, got dropped. The story goes that that Gary Gygax described the concept of Mutant to one of the designers there, and they came out with their own Mutant type game. And there's no proof to that, but they apparently had that draft from Richard Snyder. So David has that, but we've put off putting that one out right away in favor of putting out John, his brother's, John Snyder's final episode of the sci-fi game, which if TSR published it like they originally were going to, or if Adventure Games would have published it, like it was slated to be published by Adventure Games. That's where the draft came from, was the stuff that was taken out of Adventure Games. It would probably have become the new Traveler game that people would have been all over.
I'm really excited for that one.
Well, and it's like, people who play like old Traveler, they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, I got all this stuff and I can just port it into my Traveler campaign. Like, we don't have to be purists, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just honor where you got the stuff. That's all. And then what else? So we've got the 2 sci-fi games. We've got my game. Rob Kuntz offered to write a module that he would run at Arnecon. So we're going to try to scramble and get that printed up and ready to sell at
And that's
Arnecon.
a big module, right? Like, it's not a little pamphlet.
I think it's going to be about 100 pages.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Like, I was looking through it, and for some reason, even Chris said the same thing when I told him, like, well, there's a city in there. And he's like, there is? And I was like, yeah, if you scroll down in that one email, there was a whole city map in there. So Rob has created like this environment to explore in the dark realms of Blackmoor, and which is a first, because Rob has never done Blackmoor. He's always done Greyhawk. So it's like it's cool to have him, doing like an homage to Arneson, his old friend,
Yeah.
And so we're going to have that coming out pretty soon. And we're not going to do a Kickstarter or anything. It'll just be something you can get off our website when we get it out. And so we'll release it. We'll release it at Arnecon, and we will get it selling probably like by the week after Arnecon. It'll be available like in our store. It'll be available like you could go to Barnes and Noble and order it,
cool,
on their website or Amazon or whatever. And so like we're doing more print on demand.
A lot of stuff going on, man.
Well, we got that. I mean, I have like this race game that I made. It's kind of this fantasy race game thing, and we play tested it a bunch.
Did you mean Species? I'm just kidding. I am
Yeah.
just kidding,
No,
bro.
they're racing. They're racing in circles. But the things in it are a race of creatures. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a goblin race game, and
And you're halfway through Braunstein. You think maybe 2025 for that? 2026?
yeah, I want to get it out. We see it's just I only have so much time to work on stuff.
Yeah.
I'm completely ADHD. I'm a complete idiot. Like
I'm with you there, man.
it takes me 3 times as long to get like normal things done.
I'm really good at starting stuff.
I'm terrible at that too. Or yeah, I'll start to do the dishes and then I'll be standing there and I'll be like, why am I standing here in
I'm right there. My
I'm
wife
out
will
there.
catch me.
Yeah,
My
I'm
wife
out
will catch
there.
me with one sock on, just
My
holding
hands
the other
are in
end.
cold
Like,
water.
pausing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, I mean, if you want self-deprecatory humor, I'm your man.
Right on.
You know,
I want to ask, and I don't. Maybe it's not coming out, or maybe it's like way back burner. But is there an idea about getting those other versions of Strategos out?
that's on the map too. You know,
Okay,
and
cool.
the big problem is that you have to like if you're running a business, you really have to look at what's going to work and what's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So there was an offer of a war game that was set in the age of Frederick the Great. I think what is that called? Like the 100 Years' War or something like that. It's the something war. 100 years, 30 years, one of those wars. And or is it 7 years? Maybe it's the 7 Years' War. They got a lot of them. But
yeah. People fight, man.
they love to fight, and they do it for years on end. And so I wanted to like take that game and sort of include all the concepts for using fog of war with wargaming, and present like a you know sort of a modern edition of what you might have seen with Tony Bath and all those other authors, but applying it to the game that's included in the book. You know?
So there was Strategos N was Napoleonics, right? And Strategos A was Ancients.
Yeah, that's the one that has the hit points.
Yeah.
And then there was ACW or Strategos C is the American Civil War.
Okay.
And then there was another one which was Strategos RT, which I think was Ross's favorite period. It's the Russo-Turkish War.
Man, that sounds niche.
It's super niche, but he's really into it. He's got all the miniatures and everything, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, I should tell him that you know he should run RT at Arnecon maybe next year, not this coming year, but the next. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's all these games. Like I really like the idea of getting people playing war games, and so I had this idea for like a World War II like city combat game where like one side is the elves and the other is the orcs, and sort of a ridiculous fantasy game like that where you run around shooting at each other, you know, with fog of war and all of that stuff.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, it's just hard to like, you know, like, and I have a whole page of notes for the design. Like I could, if I have a map and counters, I could probably run a session. You know, I just don't have the rules written yet.
So, but the more we support, the more of this stuff you're going to be able to bring to the public, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So even if we argue, even if we call each other names, even if we block each other, this is the pipeline, people.
You know, the whole blocking thing for me is just like if you become too much of a headache, that's all. Like you're having fun and you know, like, or you're doing your thing. I don't care. Like I'm just not, you know, I don't hold grudges very long. I move on. You know.
Right on. Well, I'm glad you unblocked me, and
I'm trying to think of any other things I can tell you about that we're working on because we got a whole wall of stuff.
It sounds like there's a ton of stuff going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The other thing, like another thing I wanted to do was, I hate the fact that there are so many retro clones out there.
I might have had a lyric about that in one of my songs.
Yeah, but at the same time, I wanted to. Is that a joke? I wanted to.
I think I said basic, extreme, recloner, umpteen.
Yeah.
But then I rhymed it with Braunstein, so hopefully I didn't offend you with that.
Yeah. No, I just want to do like a sort of my own version of OD&D that covers the things that weren't covered very well in the rules, so that you can have a more complete set. Because like I can run OD&D because I've been doing it so long and I know how to handle any situation. I'm just like whatever, you know, smooth as glass when it comes to running the games. But I'd like to maybe convey that to other people I really like Dan's Champions of Zed rules. We want to do a version for the wilderness part of his thing. And then, oh yeah, the other thing is we have Dave Arneson's original draft of stuff, which was supposed to be published. I knew that I needed to hang with this because you guys might be interested in this.
Yeah.
Dave Arneson wanted to publish a Blackmoor, a more complete Blackmoor, for use with his Adventures in Fantasy rules. And so he was developing that when he had his own company. And then he lost his company, and Gary Gygax, it was never published. Gary Gygax came and talked to him, and they had dinner together, and Gary was like, come back to TSR and like, let's do some modules.
Yeah.
So he did all the DA modules with TSR. You know, that again is like, if Gary and Dave hate each other so much.
Yeah. And that comes out in the book, right? Like,
it's something I like to emphasize to
the little
people.
bun mots that you get in there from someone who knows intimately the situation. I love it.
Right. And I got that story, I think, from Stormberg. He was the one that told me that story. So he got that story probably directly from Dave or Gary or both, because he knew them both. So we have all this stuff that was supposed to go into the final DA5 module. And then we've even discovered, like, his co-author had drawn a map of Blackmoor in the future. And so it's the town of Blackmoor, but it's like expanded more, and there are more more neighborhoods around outside the castle walls and stuff. And so we kind of want to assemble all this stuff into like a massive Blackmoor book that's just kind of like
almost like a trilogy, right? Like you've got the OD&D Blackmoor that came out that Dave wasn't really happy with because it had been edited so hard, right? And then you have the first fantasy campaign where he's with the Judges Guild and he gets to release a little bit more about what's going on. I would love to get that third part where it's the big book.
I mean, all the stuff. See, this is again where I say you brosers aren't playing Brownstein, you're playing Blackmoor. All the stuff that Arneson wanted to put in Blackmoor, if you've read the first fantasy campaign, it lists all the domains that the players had.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's like, there must be like 15 different domains in there. Some of them aren't even on the map. They play from off the map. They just appear and come in. Right. So he was playing like outside of the screen, sort of like, you know, like that's kind of deep, right?
It is.
And then so he was doing that. And then so part of why he moved his characters to the outdoor survival map was because he was like, I'm so sick of you guys just going to the dungeon. All you want to do is go to the dungeon. I want to have some intrigue. I want to have some battles.
Yeah.
You guys are all banished to the outdoor survival map, and you're going to play there.
Well, now, was his Overland as deadly as it is in AD&D? Because I feel like Overland is more dangerous than the dungeon in first edition.
Yeah, that's another
you
long
can run
thing.
into like 300 orcs, like if you roll bad.
Right. Yeah, I know. That even Empire of the Petal Throne is exactly the same.
Yeah.
It has to do with the fact that the original games were designed under a premise of like rules being sort of like computer code, only written.
Yeah.
So like your dungeon master is sort of running a computer program for you. And so they wanted to codify as much as they could, but they didn't do a good job. Like the amount of treasure thing rule is really weird, and nobody understands it. Nobody even uses it from the original D&D because it doesn't really apply very well. You know, like there's the like percent of chance of in lair, and then if they're in their lair, they have this much treasure. Most DMs just fudge it. They're just like, you know what? These guys, there's 15 of these guys. They should have 150 gold pieces and maybe a +1 sword. You know, because if I roll the dice, like, what the hell are they doing with a deck of many things on the first level?
You know what's fun though is letting your players roll the random treasure and watch their eyes get all big. They love that stuff.
True. I don't play by the rules though. I'm not like that. But my point was, Arneson wanted to do all that stuff, and when they released D&D, what they essentially did was they took Blackmoor and they snapped off the most interesting sellable part, which was the dungeon adventuring. And so if you look at like the original D&D as released, there are a lot of hints to like doing other things. There are rules for aerial combat. There are rules for naval combat. There, you know, it mentions at a certain level you want to build your own domain. Here's the rules. Here's what it costs to build your buildings for your castle and stuff like that. And this, you know, these are just guidelines, always guidelines in those days because there was no way to put it all in there. But then AD&D comes out, and AD&D is even more focused on all the adventures from the modules, for the most part, are like, go over here and raid this dungeon. Go over here and raid this dungeon, you know. And so that was what the average player wanted to play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so they were catering kind of to the market at the time. And so when you look at like the origins of D&D in Blackmore, what you have again is what I was talking about earlier, is this more expansive thing. And so, look to Blackmore, because that is the source,
And I've got to tell you guys, if you haven't, if all you're used to is the conventional game, if all you're used to is like the get along gang spotlight party that like goes and does everything together and never betrays each other, you are missing whole dimensions of decision, like the kind of stuff that will have you thinking about it while you're not playing. Like, oh, can I trust the thief? Are they trying to backstab me? Are they skimming off the top? Oh, maybe I can help them out. Maybe I can cast invisibility if they give me a cut of the skim. Like all the cool stuff. That was a horrible example, but
yeah,
there is something that was lost when we moved away from this. It's not that the first version of it was the rough draft and the latest is the most polished and refined. Like there is a whole different game you can play if you reach for this stuff. And so that's what gets me excited.
Well, that's why I also dig into retro computer games, because computer games followed the same thing. They were harder to play when you first began. And then the game companies were like, well, if we make it easier to play, more people will buy it. If we make it glitzier, it gets dumbed down. And so, take it with a grain of salt. But there are people out here who like things a little bit rougher and tougher. So, like having a mean dungeon master is a great thing. All right, we should get off this, right?
Yeah, we should. Hey, thank you so much. I know today was kind of spicy online. I like doing these long form interviews.
You say spicy, I just say stupid. There's a lot of stupid online.
All right.
And I'm not. And they weren't even brosters. I have all the brosters blocked. These were other people.
It is my hope that one day in our bright future that the Blackmore bunch and the Brosters will march into the future arm in arm. But
we will get along just fine if you listen to what I talked about on this show.
That's right. Everybody that's here should watch it multiple times. Click the like button and subscribe if you want more stuff like this. And Griff, thanks so much for coming back on, man. It was good having you.
Oh, thanks.